I arrived at Grid Magic Academy in Connaught City 7 days after waking up in this world. Back in my old life, I was a college student stuck in civil engineering. Endless construction sites, sleepless nights, and misery. One rainy night, when I finally decided to quit, a truck hit me. Next thing I knew, I was an 18-year-old kid in a fantasy world where magic is real. A traveling old mage discovered I had elemental affinity, so I rushed to the academy with a few other kids from my town and made it just in time for enrollment. Now I was standing in the grand hall for the sorting ceremony. A beat-up old wizard hat floated in the air, reading each student's mind and assigning them to one of 5 schools: thunder and fire, storm and water, rock and nature, holy light, or shadow. My buddy Dane, a curly-haired guy from my hometown, told me a trick. If you think hard about the school you want when the hat lands on your head, it can pick up on it. I thought that was great advice. Dane went before me and got sorted into thunder and fire. Lucky guy. Then it was my turn. I sat down, the hat dropped onto my head, and I felt something warm flow through me, like it was connecting to my thoughts. I screamed inside my mind with everything I had. Not civil engineering, not rock and nature, anything but that. The hat stirred and said it heard me. It felt my powerful calling toward earth and wood. Before I could correct it, the hat shouted for the whole hall to hear. Rock and nature school. My face went white. I begged it to change, but the hat had already bounced off my head and moved on to the next student. I stumbled to the table in a daze. While everyone around me was chatting excitedly about their futures, I just sat there, devastated. Then something strange happened. Glowing text appeared over the hat, like an info panel. It explained that the hat was ancient and broken. After years without maintenance, it could only catch bits and pieces of a wearer's thoughts. It had only picked up the words, earth and wood, from my desperate screaming and missed the not entirely. I nearly exploded. The hat was broken and they were still using it? And why did this info panel show up after I got sorted? I sat there fuming, my face burning red. Some anger just goes beyond words. A girl with flax-colored hair sat down next to me and asked why I looked so miserable. I recognized her. She was sorted into storm and water just before me. I told her I hated civil engineering, or as they call it here, the rock and nature school. She seemed confused. She said it was the oldest school in the academy, nearly 1,000 years old, with the most spells of any school. I told her that civil engineering had an even longer history where I came from. Back in ancient times they called it forced labor. She didn't get the joke. She mentioned that most Earth Mages in the Helsen Kingdom just build houses in the city and rarely risk their lives fighting monsters. I told her that actually, the adventuring life sounded way more appealing to me. I came to a fantasy world. I wasn't going to waste it sitting on a construction site again. Then a short, chubby old man in a brown robe walked into the hall, raised his staff, and the whole room got brighter. The girl recognized the spell instantly, dancing lights. He announced that sorting was done and told the mentors to lead their students to the dorms. The girl waved goodbye and left with her group. I sighed and went to find my own mentor. Our rock and nature mentor was a tall, thin man with mountains and oak trees embroidered on his robe. As we walked through the corridors, I could hear the thunder and fire kids excitedly talking about fire arrow and lightning claw, while the storm and water students were describing some high-level spell called ice storm. I asked a classmate what famous spells our school had. He said oak staff and earth wall without even turning around. I nearly tripped. The dorm was an old castle covered in vines. The mentor told us our rooms were on the 3rd floor, 1 room each, keys on the door handles, shared bathroom at the end of the hall. Our luggage had already been moved inside by magic. My room was tiny, a hard wooden bed, a desk, a half-length mirror, and a musty wardrobe. No private bathroom, but at least it was a single. After settling in, I remembered something and got out of bed. I stared at myself in the mirror, and sure enough, translucent text appeared before my eyes. A status panel. My stats were all around 10, which I figured was the human baseline. But my intelligence was 9. 9. I was a mage with below-average intelligence. Could I even cast spells? I had 2 talents listed. The first was Earth and Wood Affinity, which massively boosted my learning speed for earth and nature magic, and could give unexpected breakthroughs in research. Civil engineering was literally chasing me into another world. The second talent was Otherworld Fortune. After each rest, I could make 1 melee attack that's guaranteed to critically hit. That sounded more like a warrior ability than a mage's. I laughed bitterly at myself. Sir 9 intelligence. That's what I'd call myself. Maybe the only spell I'd ever manage would be throwing a rock. The next morning, I dragged myself to the classroom for our first lesson. Dane was already there waving at me. Turns out it was a shared class, his Thunder and Fire group and my Rock and Nature group together. He asked about my dorm, and I told him our hallway was decorated with portraits of famous Earth Mages. He asked if there were cool spells. I said no. The portraits were all about buildings they'd constructed. The biggest painting was of the Academy's founder, Archmage Grud, personally supervising the construction of the Royal Capital's sewer system. Dane burst out laughing. He said he was starting to understand why I hated civil engineering. Our first class was cantrip theory, taught by a woman named Elena in a dark blue robe. She explained that cantrips are the foundation of all spellcasting. To become a real mage, you need to master at least 4 cantrips before you can even start learning first circle spells. Only someone who can cast a first circle spell gets to call themselves a mage. I flipped through the textbook and saw over 100 cantrips listed: Fire Spark, Dancing Lights, Resistance, Oak Staff, Mage Hand, and tons more. After 2 hours of theory about how magic works, something about weaving raw magical energy through a structure called the magic web, Elena told us to start practicing. She recommended everyone begin with Mage Hand, the most basic and practical cantrip. A lot of students groaned because they wanted to try flashy elemental stuff, but she shut that down fast. She said Mage Hand can grab books from high shelves, stir potions, or hand you a cup of coffee when your hands are full. She demonstrated by creating a translucent blue hand out of thin air. It floated around, grabbed an ink bottle off the desk, and dropped it perfectly onto a student's table. The kid nearly fell out of his chair. I opened to page 8 and started practicing. A faint blue glow flickered in my palm, and then nothing. My brain understood it, but my hands didn't cooperate. I tried again and again, feeling only a tiny trickle of magic each time. After who knows how many attempts, a translucent blue hand finally formed in front of me. The moment it appeared, text flashed across my vision. I had learned Mage Hand, Level 1, Proficiency 1 out of 5. I was thrilled. My 9 points of intelligence apparently didn't stop me from casting after all. But then I looked around and realized most people had already succeeded a while ago. The classroom was full of floating blue hands drifting around like jellyfish. Dane came over and told me he'd finished half an hour ago, and that I was the slowest one in our section. Then his own mage hand popped and vanished because he lost focus. He sheepishly went back to recasting it. That's when Dane noticed something weird. My mage hand wasn't disappearing. His had broken and been recast over a dozen times already, but mine just stayed there, solid and steady. He stared at me suspiciously. I figured out what was happening. My status panel system meant that once I successfully cast a spell, I learned it permanently. I didn't need to keep rebuilding the magic structure from scratch like everyone else. I played it cool and told Dane he just hadn't seen all my hard work. He clearly didn't buy it. I spent the rest of the class practicing control. The hand moved clumsily at first, like a baby learning to walk, but it got smoother over time. By the end of class, new text appeared. My mage hand proficiency had gone up to 2 out of 5, so I could level up spells through practice. That was exciting. After lunch, Dane and I headed to our next class, Magical Creatures. The classroom was huge, with monster specimens and paintings covering every wall. Dane spotted a winter wolf head mounted up front and got really excited. Its fangs still had frost on them, even though it had been dead for ages. Our teacher was Gore, a tough-looking guy in leather armor with a scar under his right eye and a chunk missing from his left ear. Clearly a veteran adventurer. He pulled a black cloth off a cage, revealing a giant black bat with a single glowing orange eye where its body should be. It screamed and slammed against the bars. Gore explained these were one-eyed bats, common low-level monsters in underground caves. Alone they're not too dangerous, but in groups their sound attacks can deafen or knock you out. The really interesting part was the alchemy materials. The bat's eyeballs could be processed and attached to arrows to give them homing ability. Dane poked me in the ribs, all excited about it, and I told him to go poke the teacher instead. He said he was too scared. Gore also showed us miniature bat wings preserved in a jar. Attached to a cloak or boots, they could boost your jumping distance and soften falls. He said he once jumped off a 20-foot wall without a scratch using a cloak like that. Over the next few hours, Gore showed us dozens of monster parts and what they were good for. Giant spider venom glands that cause paralysis, knoll ears used to make speed oil, troll livers as the main ingredient for stamina potions. I was hooked the entire afternoon. At the end, Gore talked about staffs. Wood staffs are the most common. Light, flexible, hard to break, and cheap. Metal ones like silver can deal extra damage to undead. Bone staffs made from high-level monster bones come with built-in spells, but they sounded way too expensive for me. Then Gore casually mentioned that new students need to get their own staff within 2 months and recommended a shop called Crow Feather Wand Workshop in the East District, saying we'd get a discount if we used his name. I recognized the move immediately. This was basically a live product placement. His transition into the sales pitch was a bit clumsy though. Dane begged me to go check out the shop on the weekend. I agreed. I probably couldn't afford anything, but window shopping sounded fun. That night, back in my room, I was exhausted. I missed getting foot massages from my past life. Then it hit me. I had Mage Hand now. I summoned the translucent blue hand and carefully guided it to my foot, trying to remember how the massage therapist used to do it. It actually worked. A nice mix of soreness and relief spread through my foot. The only downside was that I could only summon one hand at a time. If I could summon more, I could practically open a massage shop. The best surprise came while I was massaging my other foot. A notification popped up. My Mage Hand proficiency had gone up to 3 out of 5. Apparently, foot massages counted as practice. I couldn't help but laugh and wonder how much stronger it would get at level 2. The day I'd been dreading arrived, my first rock and nature class. The classroom was underground on the second basement level, and it looked more like a training arena than a classroom. Glowing vines grew on the stone walls. The floor was rough sand and gravel, and the corners were piled with rocks and wooden sticks. No desks, just crude little log stools. The whole place was painfully on-brand for civil engineering. Then the teacher walked in, and my jaw dropped. He was nearly 2 meters tall, shirtless, covered in muscles and scars, wearing nothing but a leather skirt. He looked like a barbarian warrior, not a magic professor. "I'm Brooke Stonefist, your specialist instructor," he boomed loud enough to rattle the walls. He grabbed a boulder half the size of a person and lifted it over his head like it was nothing. Then he announced the core principle of Earth Magic: train the body first. He struck several bodybuilding poses to show off his muscles. I honestly thought he was in the wrong class. A skinny kid with glasses nervously asked why mages need strong bodies. Brooke grinned and demonstrated. While holding the boulder with one hand, he cast a spell with the other, reshaping the stone into a rough human statue with his bare hands. That was a 4th circle spell called Stone Shape, meaning he was at least level 7, a genuinely powerful caster. He explained that Earth Mages need physical strength to handle their spell materials. Then he cast Earth Wall, raising a solid dirt wall 2 meters high from the ground. He explained that Earth defense spells take time to set up, and if the wall gets destroyed mid-casting, the magical backlash can knock you out of the fight. Then he smashed the wall with his shoulder and flexed again, saying a strong body lets you power through the backlash. I raised my hand and asked if we'd all end up looking like him. He laughed and said probably not. He looked that way because he also trained as a barbarian. Just regular exercise would be enough for us. I was relieved, and judging by the faces around me, everyone else was too. A girl with slightly pointed ears, probably part elf, asked where the nature part of our school came in. Brooke scratched his head and said his muscles were all natural. She clarified she meant nature magic. He realized his mistake and explained there was a druid who taught nature spells, but he was away from the academy. Brooke said he knew enough nature magic to cover cantrips and first circle spells for now. He decided to start with Oak Staff, a nature cantrip. He grabbed a wooden stick, cast the spell, and it glowed faintly brown, becoming harder and tougher, basically turning a normal stick into a magic weapon. We all grabbed sticks to practice. Mine was a really nice one actually, long, straight, and smooth. I followed Brooke's instructions, channeled magic into the stick, and almost immediately it started glowing with faint brown light, and patterns appeared on its surface. The notification popped up: Oak Staff learned, level 1, proficiency 1 out of 5. I'd learned it on practically the first try. With Mage Hand, it had taken me forever. The difference had to be my Earth and Wood affinity talent kicking in. My feelings about it were complicated. I hated everything about civil engineering chasing me into another world, but I couldn't deny the talent was actually useful. On the weekend, Dane and I headed to the East District to check out that one shop Gore mentioned. The main streets were lively, blacksmiths hammering, bakeries smelling amazing, but when we turned onto Arcane Street, things got quiet. It was all magic supply shops with staffs, crystal balls, and potion bottles in the windows. We found the place, Crow Feather Wand Workshop. Heavy oak door with carved runes, dim lighting inside, a faint smell of sandalwood and wood shavings. Dozens of staffs lined the display cases, from plain wooden sticks to fancy gem-studded ones. The shop owner was a bald, old man with a monocle and gold teeth. When Dane mentioned Gore's name, he gave us a 10% discount right away. Dane was practically drooling over the display cases. He had, "Clueless customer," written all over his face, and I wanted to slow him down before he got ripped off. The owner pulled out 3 staffs. First was a dark red sequoia staff with fire salamander tailbone powder inside. Boosts casting speed, slight fire spell bonus, but uses more mana. Second was an ashwood staff with a red crystal on top. Moderate fire bonus. Third was a plain-looking oak staff that supposedly gave a small boost to all types of spells. It was a second-hand piece, the cheapest of the 3. The prices were steep. Even the cheapest one was 4 gold and 10 silver. In this kingdom, a farm worker earns about 20 gold a year, so that staff would cost 3 months of wages with no eating or spending. I only had about 3 gold and some silver left. Couldn't afford it. But when I picked up each staff, my status panel showed me the real stats. The Sequoia staff boosted casting speed by 20% and fire spells by 5%, but increased mana cost by 10%. The Ash staff boosted fire by 10%. But the Oak staff, the cheap one, had a hidden bonus the owner hadn't discovered. On top of a 3% general spell boost, it increased ranged spell accuracy by 50%. The shop owner had apparently tested it carelessly and missed the accuracy enchantment, selling it as just a regular oak staff. I quietly told Dane to buy the oak one instead of the red sequoia he was eyeing. He was confused since it didn't seem to help with fire spells. I told him I had a feeling it would improve his accuracy, which he desperately needed. His newly learned fire arrow spell was wildly inaccurate. He asked how I knew that, and I just said intuition. He hesitated but trusted me. The owner rounded the discounted price down to 4 gold coins. Dane paid up, wincing a little at the cost. He asked if I was buying anything. I said no. He even offered to lend me money, but I turned him down. Dane was one of my few friends in this world, and I didn't want money complicating that. Besides, I hated spending beyond my means. That night in my room, I was pacing around worrying about money. I couldn't afford a staff, and I had no way to earn income. Then I kicked something under my bed and yelped in pain. I pulled it out and stared. It was a steel rebar, about a meter long, with a threaded coupling on top. Diameter 36 millimeters, grade 4 steel, HRB 500E. The cursed knowledge from my past life came flooding back. This was from the truck that killed me, the only thing I'd brought to this world. I'd tossed it under the bed when I arrived at the academy, thinking it was useless. But when I held it, my status panel lit up. Rebar staff. Rare quality, blue tier. Spell effect boost 15%. Melee damage boost 50% for blunt strikes. Critical hit damage boost 30%. The description even noted that the threaded coupling on top might be able to hold a crystal. I was stunned. This piece of construction rebar was better than anything in that one shop. The spell boost alone was 5 times what Dane's oak staff offered. The catch? It weighed nearly 10 kilograms, about as heavy as a paladin's 2-handed greatsword. I could barely swing it. Brooke was right. Earth mages really do need to train their bodies. So I started working out. Hard. 2 months of brutal physical training later, I completed Brooke's full exercise routine, 500 push-ups included. When I finished, a notification appeared. My strength permanently increased by 1 point, going from 11 to 12. A warm energy flooded through me, and all my exhaustion vanished. The number only went up by 1, but my actual strength felt like it increased way more than 10%. Maybe the scaling was exponential. Now I could finally swing that rebar staff properly. Brooke complimented my progress. I told him his monster meat jerky helped, and I meant it. A few days earlier, he'd brought dried giant crocodile meat from an adventurer friend. Most students refused to touch the blackened jerky, but my panel showed it had a special effect. Eating it and exercising could permanently boost strength or constitution, as long as your stats were under 15. I ate every piece I could get. Brooke then told me about a place called Stone Creek Town, half a day's travel east. There was a mid-sized dungeon nearby with lots of monsters coming out, and the local taverns served monster cuisine that could help with training. I panicked for a second thinking he wanted me to fight monsters. I only knew a few cantrips and hadn't even learned a first circle spell yet. But he just meant eating at the taverns. The problem was money. Monster meals were expensive, but Brooke said I could earn 4 or 5 silver coins a day using the earth-shaping spell I'd learned. The town had constant demand for building foundations and demolition work because monsters kept damaging the houses. My face twitched. So my career as a magical construction worker was already beginning. But 4 silver a day was hard to argue with. That's 6 gold a month, what a regular laborer earns in half a year. And that's just apprentice-level mage income. No wonder everyone wants to become a mage. I told Brooke I'd think about it. By now I'd learned my 3rd cantrip, earth shaping. It lets me move loose soil, reshape dirt and soft rock, or turn normal ground into difficult terrain. Basically, I'd become a human excavator. When I was little, I used to watch construction sites through the fence and imagine becoming a worker, a crane operator, maybe even an engineer. Never once did I picture myself literally being the digging machine. But the pay was good. Thanks to my earth and wood affinity talent and the rebar staff boosting my spell effects, I could move more dirt per cast than expected. Combined with my past life construction experience, I earned the top rate for a newcomer, 5 silver coins a day. The reason I was in Stone Creek Town was simple. The academy gave us a long holiday for Harvest Festival, so students from farming families could go home and help. I had no family to visit, so I came here to work instead. Dane tagged along to buy local specialty materials, and we split a double room at the inn to save money. I had another goal too. Brooke had told me every Earth Mage needs to pick a type of soil as their main casting material. He'd shown me several options: limestone powder, yellow sand, clay, black swamp mud, but none felt right when I checked them with my panel. Then a bold idea hit me. Why not mix my own? Concrete is basically cement, water, sand, and gravel. Everything except cement was easy to get. But figuring out cement in a fantasy world was a headache, so I shelved it for now. After 5 days of digging foundations, I decided to treat myself. Dane and I went to a place called the Wildfire Tavern, and I ordered the rock lizard tail soup and thunderbird breast steak. 15 silver for the pair. Dane nearly choked at the price. My panel confirmed what Brooke had promised. The combo meal could permanently increase constitution by 1 point if I exercised hard over the next 3 days. Same conditions as the crocodile jerky. Only works once, and only if your stats are under 15. I told Dane we needed to train hard after eating. He groaned. He'd tried working out with me a few days ago, and his arms were still sore. Then a familiar voice came from behind us. It was the flax-haired girl from the sorting ceremony, the one from Storm and Water. I couldn't remember her name, and she could tell, so she introduced herself. Ifalna, level 1 mage, specializing in water and wind. She'd already become a full mage in just 2 months. Dane's fork clattered onto his plate. 2 months to reach official mage status was incredible. She played it down as hard work and a little luck, but the pride in her eyes was obvious. I congratulated her and quietly reminded myself that the gap between me and real talent was wide. My status panel would have to make up the difference. Just then, the tavern doors swung open and 5 students in academy cloaks walked in loudly. I recognized them, fellow first years from the Holy Light and Shadow schools. At the tavern, a loud guy named Carl came in with 4 other students from the Holy Light and Shadow schools. He spotted us and tried to recruit Dane and me for an adventure, clearing out a goblin nest for 20 gold coins. Classic beginner quest setup. I kept quiet. Dane's eyes lit up at the money, but I had concerns. I asked Carl if any of them had adventuring experience or if they'd hired a local guide. He laughed it off, saying they were Magic Academy students and didn't need some random adventurer who wasn't even a proper class holder. When I pushed the point, he mocked me. Our dirt mage sure knows a lot. Got that experience digging holes? His friends laughed. I just sipped my soup. Some people are born with a death wish. You can't save everyone. Ifalna backed me up, quoting from a book that even the weakest goblins are smart enough to set traps. But then a girl named Lucy from Carl's group ran over and hugged Ifalna, begging her to join since she was an actual mage. Ifalna hesitated and glanced at me. I shrugged. It was her decision. Carl pressured her, and she eventually agreed. Carl asked Dane one more time. Dane looked at me. I shook my head slightly, and he declined. Carl called us cowards and walked off. Dane rolled his eyes at his back. The next morning, I dragged Dane out of bed before dawn. I'd been reading the adventurer's handbook he bought, and it mentioned an old quarry about 3 kilometers east of town with exposed grayish-white rock layers. I was pretty sure that was limestone, exactly what I needed. We found it. I pried out a chunk with my rebar staff and confirmed it was limestone. Dane had no idea what I was planning. I told him he'd see soon enough. First, I used earth shaping to mold clay into a ring shape, then had Dane fire harden it with his fire spark cantrip. We added coal to boost the heat, and he used fire control to intensify the flames. After repeating the process several times, layering and hardening, we built a crude half-sphere kiln. It was exhausting for both of us. Dane was already regretting that monster dinner I'd treated him to. He knew there'd be a price. After a short rest, I quarried a pile of limestone using my rebar staff and earth shaping, then loaded it into the kiln with coal. Dane fired it up again, this time maintaining intense sustained heat. His face went pale as his mana drained. Finally, I called stop. After cooling, I pulled out white chunks and crushed them into powder. I was thrilled. I pumped my fist in celebration. Then I tested it with water. The powder reacted violently. The water instantly boiled, white smoke poured out, and the stuff bubbled and deformed. I stepped back, my smile freezing. That wasn't how cement was supposed to behave. I stood there staring at it in silence. What I'd made wasn't cement. It was quicklime, calcium oxide. The panel confirmed it. Reacts violently with water, produces intense heat, useful for drying, disinfecting, or as a building material. Dane asked if this was what I'd been trying to make. I honestly didn't know what to say. I slapped my forehead. My chemistry knowledge had completely abandoned me. What I'd made wasn't cement. It was quicklime. My 9 points of intelligence striking again. I sighed and started bagging the stuff up, trying to remember the actual recipe for cement. But before I could think it through, screaming broke the silence. Help! Monsters! Dane and I turned to see figures running toward us. It was Carl's adventure party from the tavern, but there were fewer of them now. Out of 6, only 4.5 remained. Carl was being carried on someone's back, missing everything below the waist, bleeding everywhere, already unconscious. Ifalna and Lucy were out front, pale-faced, their robes stained with dirt and blood. When they saw it was just me and Dane, the hope drained from their faces. I grabbed my rebar staff and pulled Dane into a run, scanning behind the group. I knew this area was supposed to be relatively safe, and with Ifalna being an actual mage, regular goblins shouldn't have caused this much damage. Whatever was chasing them had to be much worse. Ifalna gasped out the answer between breaths. No warriors, including a pack leader. They'd been running for 30 minutes and were almost out of energy. I glanced back and saw hunched shapes with glowing green eyes, howling like hyenas. I remembered from my textbook, gnolls are far more dangerous than goblins, and a gnoll leader moves fast enough that we couldn't outrun it. Running wasn't an option anymore. I took stock of everyone's combat ability. Ifalna had enough mana for one more first circle spell. Lucy and the others only knew cantrips that were useless against gnolls. Dane could manage maybe 2 fire arrows. Carl was basically dead. Then my eyes landed on the bag of quicklime, and an idea hit me. I asked Ifalna if she knew Gust, a wind cantrip. She said yes, but it was useless against gnolls. I told her it wasn't the wind that mattered. The plan: she'd cast fog cloud to blind them, then immediately use Gust to blow the quicklime into their faces. She didn't question it. She took the bag and waited for my signal. 4 regular gnolls and 1 massive leader came into view, bloody claws and mouths full of fangs. Now? Fog cloud. White mist erupted between us and them. The gnolls slowed down, their leader growling a warning. While they hesitated, I used earth shaping to turn the ground behind us into thick mud to slow any retreat. A few seconds later, now, Ifalna dropped the fog. Dane and I threw handfuls of quicklime into the air, while Gust blasted the white powder straight into the gnolls' open eyes. The screams were incredible. They clawed at their faces, 2 of them rolling on the ground. One smart gnoll grabbed a water pouch and tried to rinse its eyes, But quicklime plus water creates slaked lime and intense heat. It screamed even louder. The plan worked perfectly. I raised my rebar staff to charge in and finish them off. But the leader, a gnoll named Hort, let out a deafening roar. It forced its eyes open, wiped the lime away, and sniffed the air, facing right at us. It growled that our little tricks were nothing. It could still smell us. Ifalna whispered that its challenge rating was at least level 2. A level 2 monster normally requires 4 level 2 fighters to take down safely. Even blinded, it was way beyond what a group of rookies could handle. Hort stalked toward me specifically, mocking me. It said it could smell the scheming mage, and that I was so weak I couldn't even lift my staff with one hand. I'd be its first kill. I stayed silent. I didn't know if it was tracking by smell or sound. But I wasn't going to just stand there and die. I quietly told Dane to ready a fire arrow and wait for the right moment. His hands were shaking, but he trusted me and nodded. I summoned Mage Hand and silently floated it forward, positioning it about 2 meters ahead of me and slightly to the left. Hort grinned with its fangs and suddenly charged, closing the last few steps in a burst of speed. I shouted and shoved Mage Hand into Hort's side. It wasn't strong enough to hurt him, but the sudden touch threw off his balance for just a moment. Fire arrow, Dane screamed, and a bolt of orange flame hit Hort square in the chest. Some fur caught fire, but a cantrip-level spell barely scratched a level 2 monster. All it did was make him furious. Hort ignored Dane and lunged straight at me. But I'd already cast Oak Staff right after using Mage Hand. I poured every bit of magic I could into the rebar, and brown patterns glowed across its surface. I tensed every muscle in my body, stepped forward into the charge, and swung the rebar staff in a full arc aimed at Hort's skull. My talent, Otherworld Fortune, activated, guaranteed critical hit on my next melee attack. Hort heard the swing coming. He raised a claw to block, smirking. In his mind, I was the weakest mage here, couldn't even hold my staff with one hand. How hard could a skinny mage possibly hit? The rebar connected with a sickening crunch of bone. Hort's head caved in at a grotesque angle. His body flew several meters and hit the ground twitching, then went still. Total silence. Dane's jaw dropped. Ifalna and Lucy stared like they'd witnessed the impossible. I stumbled back and collapsed on the ground, completely spent. The hit was devastating thanks to the rebar's hidden stats. 50% bonus to blunt melee damage plus 30% bonus to critical hits, on top of Oak Staff's enhancement. Hort was proof it worked. Then the notifications started rolling in. First, Constitution permanently +1. The monster meal from the tavern had kicked in during the fight. Then something unexpected. I'd learned a combat technique called Furious Slash, a first circle battle skill. It lets me channel mana into a weapon for extra damage based on how angry I am, with a chance to inflict fear. I blinked. I was a mage apprentice. Why was I learning melee combat skills? But the messages kept coming. Apparently, having enough cantrips plus a combat technique met the requirements for gaining a class level. I officially became a class holder. I gained 2 first circle spell slots that recharge after rest, plus 1 point each to strength, constitution, and perception. I stood there confused. Was I even a mage anymore? Then I remembered Brooke, my earth magic teacher who was also a barbarian. Maybe he'd have answers. Ifalna stared at my blood-covered rebar staff with a strange expression and asked if I was really a mage. I told her I was technically still just an apprentice. Even I wasn't sure what I was anymore, since I hadn't learned a proper first circle earth spell yet. Lucy and her friends were gasping with relief. I reminded them to rush Carl back to town for treatment before he bled out completely. Dane finally snapped out of it and stuttered that what I'd just done was incredible. I quoted Brooke, "The way of Earth, train the body first." Just 2 months of hard work. I finished off the remaining blinded gnolls, collected the valuable parts according to the Adventurer's Handbook, then asked if anyone had water to wash off my staff. Ifalna used water control to clean it, giving me a complicated look, like she was seeing me for the first time. She asked what the white powder had been. I told her it was quicklime. I'd been trying to make cement, but got the recipe wrong, and it accidentally saved our lives. On the walk back, I finally checked my status panel. My class was listed as Arcane Warrior, Level 1. My strength was now 13, Constitution 12, Perception 11. I had 4 cantrips. Mage Hand at Level 2, Oak Staff, Earth Shaping, and Magic Stone all at Level 1. plus the furious/combat technique, and 2 first circle spell slots waiting to be used. Not exactly the career path I'd imagined, but I was alive and officially a class holder now. I stared at my status panel. Arcane Warrior. What kind of hidden class was that? Dane asked what I was mumbling about, but I waved him off. I didn't even understand it myself. On the walk back to town, I asked Ifalna what happened with their quest. She explained they'd cleared the goblin nest successfully, but 2 goblins escaped. They chased them deeper into the area and ran straight into the knolls. Nobody expected them to be there. The local adventurer's handbook didn't even mention knolls. They weren't native to this area. Back in Stone Creek, we split up. Lucy's group rushed Carl to the church for healing, while Ifalna, Dane, and I went to the Adventurers Association to turn in the quest and ask about the knolls. The association was a 2-story stone building in the town square, packed with adventurers chatting and turning in jobs. Ifalna handed over a bag of goblin ears. 20 ears, 20 gold coins, quest complete. She asked about knoll activity. The receptionist said a small knoll tribe had recently migrated to the nearby mountains and a bounty had just been posted. 3 gold per regular knoll, 20 for a leader, 50 for a chief. When Ifalna mentioned I'd killed a leader and 4 regulars, the receptionist looked surprised but stayed professional. She asked for proof. I pulled out the knoll ears I'd collected, originally planning to use them for making speed oil, but the bounty changed my mind fast. 32 gold coins. That bag of money was heavier than anything I'd earned in months of digging foundations. No wonder people risked their lives for this job. After leaving, I split the reward 3 ways. Ifalna tried to refuse her 8 gold, saying she was just glad to be alive. I insisted. Her fog cloud and gust spells were critical to the plan. She eventually accepted. Dane flat out refused his share, saying his single-fire arrow was basically useless, and he was just along for the ride. We argued back and forth until I compromised. I'd treat him to several monster meals instead. His eyes lit up immediately. I also couldn't help but think about how the kingdom ranked professional class holders. Levels 1 through 6 were regular, 7 through 12 were advanced, and 13 plus were transcendent. They didn't use the traditional low-mid-high system. It reminded me of how a certain product back in my old world switched from small medium-large sizing to large extra-large mega, because customers kept buying the wrong size out of pride. Same energy. Back at the inn, I collapsed on the bed. Dangerous day, but incredible gains. I'd become a class holder, earned 32 gold, and then I remembered something. During the fight, I thought I'd seen a notification flash when I pushed Hort with Mage Hand, but everything was too chaotic to read it. I summoned Mage Hand. It looked sharper and more defined than before. The panel confirmed it. Level 2, proficiency 1 out of 5. The description said its stability had improved through daily use, and it had developed a hint of spiritual awareness. Curious, I tested this new awareness by telling it to go cook me dinner. The hand paused, as if actually considering the request. Then it slowly curled into a fist, turned its back toward me, and raised its middle finger. I just stared at it. With over 20 gold coins jingling in my pocket, I started thinking about how to spend them wisely. My rebar staff was already great, and eating more monster meals hadn't given any new stat boosts after the first time. Spell scrolls would be nice for self-defense, but they were insanely expensive. A single second circle scorching orb scroll cost 50 gold at the Adventurers Association. Then I had a brilliant idea. Why buy a fireball when I could make something just as good for a fraction of the price? A Molotov cocktail, simple to make, devastating in effect. I went to a local alchemy supply shop and spent 12 gold on a basic set of equipment, a small furnace, crucible, and various glass containers. It hurt to spend that much, but the investment would be worth it. Then I picked up several barrels of cheap grain liquor from a general store for just a few coppers. The plan was to distill the alcohol. I cobbled together a simple distillation setup from the glassware, lit the furnace, and waited. When the first drop condensed and fell, I held the cup under my nose and took a big sniff. The sharp alcohol smell hit me hard, way stronger than lab ethanol from my past life, clearly full of impurities. But for a fire weapon, purity didn't matter much. I filled glass bottles halfway with the distilled alcohol, added a splash of kerosene, corked them, and wrapped oil-soaked cloth strips around the necks. Molotov cocktails, complete. I held one up to the sunlight and admired it. Crude, but potentially as powerful as a second circle spell, maybe even approaching a third circle fireball. Just as I was wondering where to test them, Dane burst through the door with news. The Knoll tribe had been wiped out by a local veteran adventuring party called the McGregor Squad. Good news, since it meant the area was safe again. Then he smelled the room. I'd been doing alchemy in our hotel room. I told him to keep quiet about it. With the area safe, I convinced Dane to come back to the quarry. He groaned about his arm still being sore from last time, but I promised him dinner and he was ready to go instantly. This time I needed one more ingredient. I'd been racking my brain about what was missing from the cement recipe, and it hit me like lightning when I walked past a blacksmith shop. Iron or powder. I tried buying some from the blacksmith, but he didn't sell iron powder and instead asked if my rebar staff was for sale. Awkward. I ended up getting the iron powder from the alchemy shop instead, where the owner gave me a returning customer discount. Back at the quarry, our crude kiln from last time was still standing. I mixed the materials from memory. 6 parts limestone powder, 3 parts clay, and a pinch of iron powder, blended together with earth shaping. Dane fired up the kiln again, grumbling the whole time. It took until dark, and I had to adjust the ratios a few times, but finally I got what I wanted, a pile of plain gray powder. The notification lit up my vision. I'd completed a successful alchemical creation and invented a new material called cement. I also earned a special trait called Alchemy Pioneer. As the inventor of a brand new material, I permanently gained 1 point each to perception and charisma, plus I'd find it easier to notice correct material ratios during future alchemy. After all the failures and frustration, I'd actually done it. Cement existed in this world now, and I was the one who made it. The Alchemy Pioneer trait gave me perception and charisma instead of intelligence. So much for shaking off the Sir 9 Intelligence title anytime soon. But free stat points are free stat points, and the improved alchemy intuition was genuinely useful. I scooped up a pinch of the cement powder and rubbed it between my fingers. It felt almost identical to the ordinary Portland cement from construction sites in my old life, just slightly less refined. But cement alone isn't concrete. I still needed sand and gravel. Luckily, the quarry was full of broken rocks. I used earth shaping to sort the rubble by size, fine particles into a sand pile, larger chunks into a gravel pile. Dane whistled and said my earth shaping was getting really smooth. Then my Alchemy Pioneer trait kicked in. I closed my eyes trying to remember the concrete mix ratio, and the numbers appeared crystal clear in my mind. Water to cement to sand to gravel at 0.38 to 1 to 1.11 to 2.72. That would make C30 grade concrete. I grabbed a pen and paper before I could forget. Dane peeked over my shoulder and asked where those numbers came from. I told him he just wasn't paying close enough attention. The problem was water. We barely had half a canteen left, and the nearest river was a kilometer away. We were about to call it a day when footsteps approached. It was a fauna with a few others, led by a local adventurer. They'd come to collect belongings of Sindori, the teammate who'd died in the Knoll attack. The mood was somber. Lucy and the others thanked me again for saving them, then headed back to town. But I had a favor to ask of Fauna. She knew Create Water, a first circle water spell. I needed about 170 liters. She winced and said her mana could only produce about half that. I told her whatever she could manage was fine. I'd just scale down the other materials. She agreed and started casting. A stream of clean water condensed from the air and poured into my containers. It drained her visibly. Her face went pale. I told her to stop when I saw she was struggling. She'd made about 80 liters. I poured the water into the dry mix according to the ratio, stirring constantly with my rebar staff. A gray paste formed, exactly the right consistency. Dane poked it and said it looked like mud. I told him to wait until it hardened. I found some small broken wooden crates around the quarry, coated the insides with kerosene as a release agent, and poured the concrete in. Now we just had to wait for it to set. Dane asked how long the concrete would take. I answered automatically. 24 hours to reach demolding strength, 28 days for full design strength. They all stared at me blankly, so I translated. We could check it tomorrow, and it would be completely hard in about a month. When fully cured, it could support 3 armored knights standing on an area the size of a silver coin. Ifauna studied the gray slurry and admitted it would be impressive if it was really that strong. Then she asked something that caught me off guard. When we first met, you hated the rock and nature school. "So why are you researching this stuff now?" I froze. She was right. I'd spent years despising civil engineering, and here I was, pouring my heart into making concrete in a fantasy world. Standing there brushing dust off my hands, I realized something. Maybe I never actually hated civil engineering itself. What I hated was the brutal working conditions, the 7 days-a-week schedule, the endless overtime, being stationed 1,000 kilometers from home with barely 20 days off per year and constantly getting my wages delayed. "I guess I figured some things out," I said quietly. Ifalna noticed the shift in my mood and didn't push further. Then a notification appeared. I'd successfully created a new material, concrete, and my alchemy proficiency went up. Mixing concrete counted as alchemy, apparently. I could call myself the concrete alchemist. The real surprise was the concrete stats. Rare quality, blue tier, with 3 special traits. Flowing form meant it greatly improved the stability of earth-shaping spells while still wet, making spell constructs match my intentions more closely. Solid as bedrock, boosted earth defense spells by 20% and extended their duration after hardening. Corrosion resistant, gave strong resistance against fire, ice, and acid, significantly improving the durability of earth spells cast with it. 3 traits on a single material. Even my personal talents didn't have that many bonuses. We headed to the Wildfire Tavern to celebrate. I ordered 3 of the signature monster meals. The stat boost wouldn't work a second time, but the food was delicious enough to justify the price on its own. Over dinner, Ifalna asked about our studies. Dane complained that he was stuck learning Lightning Claw. Fire spells came naturally to him, but after a week of practice, he couldn't even produce a spark of electricity. Ifalna suggested his lightning affinity might just be low and he could focus purely on fire instead. She explained that in my school too, people could specialize, pure earth mages or pure nature mages who become druids. Dane accepted his fate as a fire mage and started fantasizing about wearing gold-trimmed red robes and raining fire from the sky. Ifalna casually mentioned that just last month someone accidentally burned down a field owned by the Adventurers Association while casting and went bankrupt paying damages. She was a natural at throwing cold water on things. Fitting for a water mage. Dane asked what my plan was. I said I probably wouldn't go the druid route, but beyond that I had no idea. I'd stumbled into becoming an arcane warrior without ever learning a real first circle spell, then accidentally developed alchemy skills. I wasn't a proper mage, wasn't really a warrior, and definitely wasn't a real alchemist. For now, I'd just take things one step at a time. After the holiday, I brought some monster jerky back for Brooke as a gift. He loved it, chomping away happily. Then I got to the real reason for my visit. I told him I'd learned a combat technique and become a class holder during the break, and I was worried it might mess up my path as a mage. Brooke listened to my story about fighting the Knoll leader and nodded thoughtfully. He said my situation sounded like an arcane knight, a warrior subclass that combines melee fighting with magic study. I panicked. Did that mean I had to switch to being a warrior? He laughed and told me I had the cause and effect backwards. Using himself as an example, he explained that he didn't get strong because he became a barbarian mage. He learned magic and trained his body separately, and people just called him that afterward. The class name is a result, not a restriction. He told me to keep studying magic and treat the combat technique as a bonus tool. Just like him, he could go toe-to-toe with an owlbear, but his earth magic was still his specialty. He mentioned I could also train with the Royal Knights to become a proper arcane knight, but I turned that down immediately. No interest in swearing loyalty to some king I'd never met. I left his office feeling much more relaxed. Having an extra option wasn't a bad thing, and I should keep up my physical training too. I rushed to the first post-holiday class. Elena stood at the front and announced that since everyone should have mastered at least 4 cantrips by now, we'd start learning first circle spells. The room buzzed with excitement. Learning a first circle spell meant becoming a real mage with an actual class level. Elena explained that unlike cantrips, first circle spells usually require 3 components: verbal incantation, specific gestures, and physical materials. The incantation resonates with the magic web to complete the casting. The gestures could be a hand sign or a whole sequence of movements. And some spells need specific materials. Featherfall needs an actual feather. Tasha's acid brew needs a bit of rotten food. Without materials on hand, even a mastered spell can't be cast. She pulled out a thick leather spellbook stuffed with notes, diagrams, and small items tucked between pages. Feathers, sand, dried petals, seeds. She explained that every mage needs their own spellbook, not just for recording spells, but as a material kit. Store a tiny bit of each spell's required material on the page next to its notes, so you're never caught without what you need. Then she demonstrated. She pulled a trembling gray rabbit from a cage and threw it straight up toward the ceiling. It screamed and flailed as it plummeted back down. Right before impact, she pulled a feather from her spellbook, cast the gestures, and whispered, "Feather fall." The rabbit's descent slowed to a gentle float, and it landed softly on the desk, completely unharmed. She pointed out that she'd kept a feather tucked into the feather fall page of her spellbook. If you were falling off a cliff, you wouldn't want to be digging through your pockets for a feather. I nodded, taking it in. Spellbooks in this world weren't like in games where you can only memorize a set number of spells. Once you learned a spell, you could use it anytime as long as you had spell slots. The book was more like a combination notebook and toolbox. Back in class, Elena's tone turned serious. She warned everyone not to rush into adventuring before mastering enough first circle spells. She mentioned that students from another school had casualties during the holiday. Dane and I exchanged glances. We knew exactly who she meant, but she didn't name us since we were just bystanders. The first spell she taught was Grease the Soles, one of the most practical first circle spells. It dramatically boosts your movement speed for a short time. Perfect for running away. Dane shook his head sadly and said poor Carl should have learned this before going adventuring. Now that he'd become a halfling, he wouldn't need it anymore. I had no words. I tried building the spell's magic structure following Elena's instructions, but first circle spells were enormously more complex than cantrips. I failed repeatedly. Most of the class did too. It took me a full week of practice before I finally cast it successfully. Cantrips I could learn in a single class, but first circle spells were exponentially harder. Most students managed it in 3 to 5 days. I was a bit slower, but my panel meant I only had to succeed once to permanently master it. That was my advantage. I decided I needed to find a way to boost my intelligence somehow. Next on my list were Feather Fall and Alarm as required spells, plus the Earth spell Tremor and the Nature spell Speak with Animals for my future adventuring career. With Carl's disaster as a lesson, I wanted to be as prepared as possible. Then Dane came sprinting at me across the training field, practically glowing. He'd fully mastered his first circle spell and officially become a level 1 mage. But what really excited him was the feeling. He said it was like someone cleaned out his brain. Everything about magic structure that confused him before suddenly made perfect sense. My smile froze. He was describing an intelligence boost. Regular mages apparently get intelligence when they gain their class level. When I became a class holder, I'd gotten strength, constitution, and perception instead. My stat points had gone to the wrong attributes, and my panel didn't let me choose where they went. Dane thought my expression was jealousy and told me not to worry. I'd become a proper mage soon too with more practice. He didn't know I was already a class holder. I hadn't told him, not because I was hiding it, but because I still didn't fully understand my own situation. Over the following weeks, I ground through spell after spell. Alarm and Featherfall each took me about a week, painfully slow. But Tremor and Speak with Animals? 1 day each. My Earth and Wood affinity talent made Earth and Nature spells absurdly fast to learn. I also officially registered as a mage at the Academy, since they had the authority to certify new mages. After demonstrating Tremor, I received my registration along with an official brown robe and badge. I didn't wear them, too ugly. One day, Dane showed up in a brand new red robe with a flame badge on his chest, looking sharp. He was heading to a Fire Mage exchange event with his mentor. He told me proudly that he could now cast 3 first circle spells reliably, and his mentor said he might reach level 2 before the semester ended. Watching Dane leave in his fancy red robe, something he said suddenly triggered a realization. A serious one. Teachers had explained that a level 1 mage only needs 4 first circle spells to advance to level 2. I rushed to the nearest bathroom mirror and pulled up my status panel. I had 5 first circle spells: Grease the Soles, Featherfall, Alarm, Speak with Animals, and Tremor. But my class level was still stuck at 1. Something was wrong. I went straight to Brooke's office. He was reading with a ghost hand holding his drink, a nice use of mage hand. I told him my problem. 5 first circle spells learned, 0 level up. He believed me since he'd seen how fast I picked up earth spells. He paced around me, then asked if I'd been practicing any combat techniques lately. I said no, I'd been focused entirely on spells. That's the problem, he said, slapping his thigh. He drew a diagram on parchment. Normal casters level up through spells alone. But since I'd become a class holder through a combat technique, I'd taken a different path. My arcane warrior class probably needed both spells and combat skills to advance. I reminded him he'd told me before that combat techniques wouldn't affect my progression. He scratched his head sheepishly. He'd been speaking from his own experience, but his situation was different. He'd become a level 4 mage first and only picked up the barbarian class afterward. So I was stuck. I needed to learn more combat techniques to level up. I'd wanted to be a pure mage, but the warrior path kept pulling me back. Brooke offered to teach me barbarian techniques like Savage Roar and Frenzied Strike. They didn't feel right for me. My class was Arcane Warrior, not Barbarian. He agreed and suggested I check the Academy library for a combat technique encyclopedia to find something that fit my style. The library was an enormous old stone building with shelves reaching to the ceiling. I found the combat section and opened the Kingdom's Combat Technique Encyclopedia. The table of contents alone was dozens of pages, everything from basic one-circle techniques like double slash and disarming strike to advanced ones like iron wall defense and vacuum slash. I had no idea where to start. Then Afauna appeared behind me. She noticed the combat technique book and raised an eyebrow. I sighed and gave her the short version of my leveling problem. She nodded, then got to her actual reason for finding me. The Academy required first-year students to complete at least 3 dungeon-related quests from the Adventurers Association, including at least 1 monster-killing mission. She'd contacted a level 5 druid from Stone Creek Town who was willing to lead a party next week. She asked if I wanted to team up. Having an experienced guide was exactly the kind of precaution I believed in after the Carl disaster. I told her I'd bring Dane, and we agreed to meet at the Wildfire Tavern next Tuesday. Our party set out from Stone Creek Town at dawn, hiking through dense forest toward the dungeon. I summoned several mage hands to carry everyone's backpacks, which kept our pace quick. Leading the group was Hal, the level 5 druid Afauna had hired. He was a thin, sun-darkened man in rough linen clothes with a bone knife at his belt. He looked more like a farmer than a veteran adventurer. The only giveaway was the lightning falcon perched on his shoulder, its feathers shimmering with a metallic blue-purple sheen. Hal explained that the forest around the dungeon was like Floor Zero. Magic energy leaking from the dungeon caused local animals to mutate, growing extra horns, scales, or even gaining breath abilities. Most were weak enough that even regular adults could handle them. Rock lizards were a common example, their meat toughened by magic into a staple food for adventurers and taverns. I asked if his falcon was also a mutant creature. He said no. It was called Thunderclaw, a chick he'd rescued from the dungeon years ago and raised as his companion. Thunderclaw flew up and started calling out. Dane said the bird sounded pretty nice. I quietly cast Speak with Animals to hear what it was actually saying. Everyone look at me. Any females around? I need to mate. It was a mating call. I nearly choked. Then Dane whistled, imitating the bird's tune surprisingly well. Thunderclaw landed back on Hal's shoulder, stared at Dane, blinked twice, and said, "You? No thanks." I'd never seen such clear disgust in a bird's eyes. I burst out laughing. Dane had no idea why. Minutes later, Thunderclaw suddenly let out sharp warning cries, its feathers crackling with electricity. I understood the alert and warned the group at almost the same moment Hal raised his hand to stop us. "Don't worry," Hal said with a wild grin. "I've got this." His body started swelling and shifting. Brown-black fur erupted from his skin. In seconds, the thin farmer had become a massive black bear, over 2 meters tall, standing upright. He let out a roar that shook leaves off the trees. "Wild shape, bear." Ifauna explained quietly that Hal belonged to the Circle of the Moon, druids known as the fiercest wildland guardians, able to shift freely between human and beast forms. 2 enormous boars the size of small cattle burst through the bushes, covered in mud armor, eyes blazing red, tusks draped with fresh bark. They charged straight at us. Bear Hal rose on his hind legs, then slammed his paws into the ground and charged right back. At the last second, he sidestepped with impossible agility, grabbed the left boar by the neck, and used its own momentum to swing it into the other one. Both beasts crashed through a tree trunk. I raised my rebar staff to help, but Afauna shook her head. She'd been preparing a spell too, but was already letting it fade. There was no need. Hal pounced on the struggling boars. His claws glowed with metallic light as he hammered their backs. The mud armor shattered like dry crackers, exposing deep gashes down to the bone. The whole fight lasted just a few breaths. Dane awkwardly blew out the flame he'd summoned in his palm. That's it. He's that strong. They were just weak opponents, Hal said, shaking blood off his fur. Lunch is sorted. Hal was right that those boars were nothing special, not even as tough as a basic challenge rating 1 monster like a bear goblin. A group of 4 or 5 level 1 fighters could handle one of those without much trouble. For hours later, we'd reached the first floor of the dungeon and stopped for lunch. I was grilling the wild boar meat over a campfire while nervously glancing around. Being on my first real dungeon trip had me on edge. Relax, Hal rumbled in his deep bear voice. He was still in bear form, lying on his side by the fire. He said it was more intimidating that way, keeping wildlife from bothering us. Plus, this floor had been cleared out over a decade ago. Nothing above challenge rating 2 should be around. And I'd set up my alarm spell at the entrance. Under Hal's guidance, I'd cut the best parts of the boar: loin, hind leg, tenderloin, and shoulder. Wild boar meat is gamey since they're uncastrated, but I brought salt, honey, and spices. The meat turned out surprisingly tender after grilling, and the honey glaze mostly masked the smell. Dane poked a glowing purple mushroom and asked if it was edible. Hal growled that purple parasols cause hours of hallucinations, and some subspecies are outright deadly. Don't touch anything you can't identify. The dungeon itself was impressive, ancient beyond the kingdom's history. Nobody knows who built it. The ceilings were at least 10 meters high. Blue-green glowing moss covered the walls like stars. Luminescent mushrooms dotted the ground, and tall glowing ferns grew in the distance. Even without our campfire, it wasn't that dark. Then Thunderclaw came flying back from deeper in the tunnels and whispered urgently to Hal. He stood up immediately and told us to stay put while he went to check something. He disappeared around a corner before I could respond. Something felt off, but Afauna said if it were dangerous, he would have taken us with him to retreat. We kept eating. Then the alarm spell I'd placed at the entrance triggered, a sharp ringing sound right behind us. I grabbed my staff and spun around. A massive dark shape was approaching, roughly bear-shaped. Dane relaxed, mouth stuffed with food, assuming it was Hal coming back carelessly. But Afauna gripped her staff tight. That's not Hal. It was a grayish-white bear, even bigger than Hal's bear form. It lumbered toward us and stopped a few meters away. No aggression. It just stared at us with calm gray-blue eyes. I told everyone to hold their fire. My Speak with Animals spell was still active, so I stepped forward and spoke slowly. Hello, white bear. What do you want? The bear tilted its head, then let out a string of deep rumbles. When the meaning translated in my ears, my expression turned very strange. The bear's name was Beck. He'd noticed our fake bear had left the group. Beck wanted everyone to know he was a real bear and stronger than the fake one. If we gave him some of that honey-roasted meat, he'd work for us instead. Did we have a deal? I explained that our fake bear was actually a druid doing reconnaissance work, and besides fighting in bear form, he could also cast spells like thorn growth and barkskin. Could Beck do those things? Beck went quiet for a moment, sounding a little deflated. No, he couldn't do those things. So, I started. But Beck can electrify his claws, and Beck can call down lightning strikes on an area. Beck is definitely not weaker than that fake bear in a fight. I sucked in a sharp breath. A bear with lightning powers? Area of effect thunder attacks? Hey, big guy, I said carefully. You're not from around here, are you? Beck the white bear sat by our campfire happily licking honey off his paws, munching on grilled wild boar organs. He said he liked the taste, way better than eating raw. Dane scooted away nervously and whispered asking if Beck might suddenly attack us. I told him we'd made a deal, and a bear that didn't attack us when hungry definitely wouldn't attack after being fed. When Hal came back in bear form carrying a glowing purple plant in his mouth, he froze at the sight. He counted 3 humans and 1 bear, same as before. Then he realized the math was wrong. Wait, then who am I? Beck sat up and greeted him politely. Hello, fake bear. Beck is a real bear. Hal dropped his plant, shifted back to human form, and grabbed his knife. I quickly explained that Beck was friendly and just wanted food. Hal cast speak with animals himself and interrogated Beck. Beck explained he'd been chasing a cockatrice and got lost, then smelled our cooking. The mention of a cockatrice made Hal tense. Those creatures turn flesh to stone and normally only appear on dungeon floor 4 or below. The local adventurer's handbook confirmed this. Hal concluded that Beck must have come from at least floor 5 or deeper, since the dungeon had only been explored down to 5 and nobody had reported his species before. When I asked if Beck was strong, Hal admitted he probably couldn't beat him in a fight. The faint electric arcs on Beck's claws backed that up. I was glad we hadn't tried to attack him. Then Hal explained why he'd left earlier. Thunderclaw had found large animal droppings containing material from deeper floors. He'd gone to investigate quietly. Then he paused and asked Beck if he'd used the mushroom patch in that direction as a bathroom. Beck looked embarrassed for the first time and muttered that humans were perverts. After sorting everything out, Hal proposed changing our plan. Instead of staying on floor 1 collecting plants and killing bats, he wanted to go down to floor 3. With Beck on our team, safety wouldn't be an issue, and the rewards from deeper floors were much better. Dane panicked. We'd agreed to stick to floor 1. But Hal said he normally worked on floors 2 and 3 and only stayed on 1 for our safety. The Adventurer's Handbook said floor 3 had been cleared years ago, its best treasures already taken, and it included a hand-drawn monster distribution map with recommended safe routes. Monsters down there were challenge rating 3 at most, which our party could handle now. Ifalna agreed after thinking it over. She trusted my judgment, and I'd said it sounded reasonable. So we headed deeper. Hal shifted back into bear form to lead, with Beck lumbering right behind him. Having a massive lightning-powered bear in the group made everything easy. Any monster with half a brain fled the moment it caught Beck's scent. Beck casually swatted a one-eyed cave bat out of the air, but smashed it into paste, splattering eyeball everywhere. I winced. Those eyeballs were sellable materials. Beck, go easier. Those are worth money. I mean, about a third of a wild boar. Beck was gentle, he said innocently, goose still dripping from his claws. They're just fragile. We reached the stairway leading down to floor 2 without any trouble. We breezed through floors 1 and 2 without any real trouble. Hal knew the layout perfectly and led us down to floor 3 in no time. He was explaining our target, stone gargoyles whose horns are valuable alchemy ingredients. When Beck suddenly sniffed the air, shouted, "Beck smells something yummy," and bolted off before anyone could stop him. We chased after him and found him squatting by a rock wall, proudly holding a face basin-sized cave spider in his mouth. He crunched it down in seconds and called it a dessert. Then we heard it, a scratching sound from the rock crevices, like countless legs scraping on stone. Getting louder, getting closer. Beck had raided a spider nest. Dozens of fist-sized black spiders poured out, followed by dog-sized ones. Then, descending slowly from the ceiling, came the queen, a massive black spider the size of a full-grown bull, wrapped in silk, with fangs for a mouth. Challenge rating 4 at least, extremely rare for floor 3. Look what you did, Hal roared at Beck. The two bears charged the queen together, Hal with metallic gleaming claws, Beck with crackling electricity. They left the swarm to us. Hundreds of spiders, coming from both directions down the tunnel. I jammed my rebar staff into the ground and cast earth shaping, turning the floor in front of me into thick mud. My recently upgraded spell slowed them to half speed. Then I cast Tremor, but 8-legged creatures have absurdly stable footing. It barely affected them. But that wasn't the real plan. I just needed time to grab my backpack from Mage Hand and pull out my Molotov cocktails. I held the oil-soaked cloth wicks toward Dane. Light me up. Dane was blasting the other direction with Burning Hands, a first circle spell that shoots a cone of fire from his fingertips. Ifalna's gust cantrip was amplifying the range, and spiders were curling into charred balls 7 or 8 meters out. I spun around and hurled 3 lit Molotov cocktails into my side of the swarm. The glass shattered and the alcohol-kerosene mix ignited instantly, a massive wave of fire that dwarfed Burning Hands. Dane caught a glimpse and yelled that it was incredible. Both directions were clear. Then Ifalna screamed, "Left!" I'd forgotten the ceiling. Spiders had crawled along the walls and dropped behind us, less than 3 meters away. Too close for Molotovs without burning ourselves. Just as I was bracing for melee combat, Ifalna stepped forward, pulled a small bottle of water from her belt, smashed it under her boot, and cast an incantation. Rhyme Frostbind. The splash of water flash froze into white frost, expanding in a cone that caught dozens of spiders mid-lunge. They were frozen solid, locked in attacking poses, completely immobilized. It was a second circle ice spell, a simplified version of the famous fifth circle ice cone. Being able to cast second circle spells meant Falna was at least level 3 now. She'd progressed incredibly fast. The spell looked familiar from a game I'd played in my previous life, and before I could stop myself, the words flew out of my mouth. Holy crap, frostbite legs. The moment I said it, I wanted to die. I was referencing the spell, not her actual legs, but Falna had already gone rigid. She turned slowly, her green eyes filled with disbelief. Frost. Bite. Legs? No, wait, I wasn't talking about your legs. I tried to explain, but she'd already turned away with an ice-cold expression, refusing to look at me. She walked through the frozen spiders in silence. Each one shattered into pieces as her boots passed by. I really needed to learn to keep my mouth shut. On the other side, Hal and Beck finished off the Spider Queen. Beck leaped up and stomped on her head, then lost his balance and sat on her. Her 8 legs couldn't support a giant bear's weight, and she collapsed. With the queen dead, the remaining small spiders scattered into the darkness. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and glanced at Falna. She was still facing away from me, definitely still angry about the frostbite legs comment. Hal shifted back to human form and scolded Beck for causing the whole mess. Beck hung his head like a guilty kid, but then perked up when Hal pulled valuable materials from the queen, poison glands, and extra hard leg spines worth at least 40 gold coins. Beck wants a share? Beck killed the big spider, the white bear demanded. You caused this in the first place, Hal snapped. Beck still deserves it, Beck replied honestly. If Beck hadn't eaten the little spider, Fake Bear wouldn't have gotten these materials. Hard to argue with that logic. Hal negotiated. After the quest ended, he'd spend 1/5 of total earnings, about 15 gold, on honey and meat for Beck. Beck asked how much that was. Hal said about 5 pigs and 2 big jars of honey. Deal. I kept my mouth shut, but I was impressed by Hal's negotiating skills. Our total haul would easily exceed 120 gold, so 1/5 was way more than 15. Plus, 5 pigs and 2 jars of honey cost maybe 10 gold at market price. This old druid had definitely played middleman before, but I wasn't going to complain. We'd agreed before the trip that Hal would take half the profits as the experienced guide, and the 3 of us would split the rest equally. Finding a level 5 adventurer willing to lead beginners was rare, so the deal was fair. We found a natural safe room in the dungeon to rest for the night. By the campfire, Hal grabbed one of my Molotov cocktails from my backpack and asked where I'd gotten it. I told him I'd made it myself. He was impressed and asked to buy some after the quest. I said 5 gold each, then pretended to reconsider and offered him the cost price of 3 gold. He immediately ordered 5 bottles. Inside, I was celebrating. The actual production cost of each Molotov was 4 or 5 copper coins. I'd just made a deal with over 90% profit margins. But I kept a straight face. I felt someone watching me and looked back, but only saw Falna with her back turned, organizing her spellbook. Must have been my imagination. She was actually interested in my inventions too, but she decided not to talk to me until I apologized properly, which I hadn't done because I'm an idiot. Then Beck dragged something through the doorway, the Spider Queen's mangled corpse. He wanted us to roast it for him. Dane turned green. The legs were thick as a man's arm, covered in hard shell, with sticky fluid oozing from the joints. Hal said the legs were actually edible once the venom glands were removed, just not great texture. Beck was getting impatient waiting for someone to cook it, so I volunteered. I asked Hal to lend me his knife. It was a rare chance to practice butchering a monster firsthand. Hal handed it over and started teaching me how to cut open a giant spider's legs. Our little business deal had apparently earned me some goodwill with the old druid. Under Hal's guidance, I cut several legs off the Spider Queen and roasted them over the campfire. The shell turned crispy and gave off a strange, burnt smell mixed with something fishy. My panel showed the roasted Spider Queen legs were green-quality food with a high chance of permanently boosting agility by 1 point. The catch was it would attract spider aggression for a while, and the description basically guaranteed it tasted terrible. But the Spider Queen was already dead, so the aggression thing didn't worry me. I'm going to eat this, I announced. Dane's eyes went wide. Even Falna, who'd been ignoring me all afternoon, couldn't help turning around with a look of pure disgust. I told them it was basically monster cuisine. Any tavern would charge at least 10 silver for it. Hell was game. He cracked open a piece of shell, revealing white meat inside, popped it in his mouth, then immediately spat it out. Still tastes awful. That didn't stop me. Ifalna came up behind me and tugged my sleeve, quietly telling me to reconsider. But I grabbed a fistful of spider meat and shoved it all in my mouth. My face crumpled. It was like crab meat, but tougher, with an intense bitterness and that unmistakable bug stink. I forced myself to swallow every bit. No notification appeared. Not enough. I picked up a second piece with the expression of a man walking to his execution. After the second chunk went down, the text finally appeared. Agility +1. My body suddenly felt lighter, like invisible weight had been lifted off me. Worth it, I gasped, then sprinted to a corner and dry heaved. Nothing came up. Apparently my body absorbed it instantly. I rinsed my mouth with water. Dane said he was impressed I managed 2 pieces. I put on a serious face and told them I'd read in an ancient book that eating spider queen legs improves agility, and I recommended they try it too. Dane refused instantly. He whispered to Ifalna that I just didn't want to suffer alone and was trying to trick them into eating it. She nodded vigorously. Fair enough. I'd just have to level up by myself. Beck didn't care about any of this. He chomped through whole legs, shell and all, purring with satisfaction. After the meal, I grabbed my rebar staff and started practicing basic combat swings in a corner. I'd looked through the combat technique encyclopedia at the library but couldn't decide what to learn, so I figured I'd master the fundamentals first. Hal watched me for a while, then spoke up. You're doing it wrong. Your wrists are too stiff and your power source is off. He asked to see my staff. I tossed it over one-handed. When he caught it, his arm dropped hard from the weight. He nearly dropped it. He gave me a long look. No wonder you train your body. Then he demonstrated proper technique. Feet apart, knees bent, center of gravity low. Power starts from the ground, flows through the waist, transfers through the shoulders and arms, and concentrates at the weapon's tip. The wrist should stay relaxed, an extension of the arm, not a rigid joint. Like water flowing, not brute force hammering. I watched carefully and immediately saw what I'd been doing wrong. Too much arm strength, stiff wrists, scattered impact point. I tried again with his method. The swing felt significantly smoother, and the whistling sound was sharper. That's it. Try hitting that rock. Hal pointed at a weathered boulder in the corner. I gathered my breath, felt the power build from my feet up through my core, rotate through my torso, channel through my arms, and pour into the tip of the rebar. I swung with a shout. The impact sent stone chips flying. A clear dent appeared in the rock face with cracks spreading outward like a spider web. My arms went numb from the recoil, but the result spoke for itself. I thanked Hal sincerely for the combat lesson. Feeling guilty about overcharging him earlier, I told him to forget the 5-bottle deal. I'd send him a whole crate of Molotov cocktails for free instead. His eyes went wide, and he grinned ear to ear. Then he looked me over thoughtfully and offered to teach me a combat technique, something his old adventuring buddy used to specialize in. That buddy was apparently another weirdo who liked jumping on people's heads with a giant hammer. Jump slash, Hal said. Jump up, smash down. Simple but deadly. He demonstrated. Crouch low, compress like a spring, explode upward, and at the peak of the jump, before you even start falling, channel all your body weight plus the weapon's mass downward like a meteor striking Earth. It was perfect for me. Heavy weapon, decent strength stats, and all my attribute gains had gone into physical stats anyway. I started practicing immediately. The first few attempts were clumsy, but I adjusted quickly with Hal's coaching. On one clean attempt, the rebar slammed into the ground with a thunderous crash, kicking up dust everywhere. The notification appeared, jump/learned, level 1. It was a no-cost combat technique, no mana required. Even better, the description mentioned it could be enhanced with gravity magic for extra damage. Then came the notification I'd been waiting for. Class level up. I gained 1 additional first circle spell slot, plus 1 point each to strength, constitution, and perception. So Brooks' theory was right. My arcane warrior class needed both spells and combat techniques to advance. Learning jump slash had been the missing piece. The good news was I finally understood my upgrade path. The bad news? Once again, 0 intelligence points. My class had arcane in the name, but apparently my brain was never getting any smarter. The next day, we moved carefully through floor 3, hunting stone gargoyles. These were monsters born from magic, originally decorative stone carvings on buildings that some ancient mage had brought to life. They could stay perfectly still for months, disguised as ordinary statues, then ambush anything that came close. Hal and Beck led the charge with a refreshingly simple strategy: smash every statue they found. If it woke up and fought back, it was a gargoyle. If it didn't react after getting beaten on, it was a veteran gargoyle playing dead. Those were the cunning old ones. Beck's electrified claws hit like sledgehammers aimed at heads, while Hal targeted weak joints with surgical precision. Ifalna stayed behind them, ready to use her second circle wind spell to knock any gargoyle back if it tried to fly away. Dane and I were on perimeter duty. Our first circle spells barely scratched gargoyle stone skin, so we watched for smaller monsters attracted by the fighting noise. I noticed spiders watching us from the shadows throughout the day, the side effect of eating the spider queen. They'd peek out with glowing eyes, then vanish the moment they sensed Beck or Hal nearby. Scattered remnants without their queen, too scared to attack. The gargoyle hunt was going great. We'd smashed through over a dozen statues and killed 5 gargoyles before they even knew what hit them. Then Hal spotted 2 more in an open stone hall, one regular-sized lying on a fallen pillar, and a bigger one wedged into a wall niche. Hal and Beck charged in as usual. The big gargoyle was fast. It dodged Beck's swipe and tried to fly away while blasting a silent screech that stunned Beck for a moment. But Ifalna was ready with her wind creation spell, blowing it off balance. Beck grabbed its legs and slammed it down hard. While I was watching their fight, something hit me from behind without any warning. Ice-cold, killing intent, then searing pain ripping across my shoulder blade. Blood instantly soaked through my shirt. The attacker flickered like a ghost and vanished. "Phase spider," Ifalna shouted with real fear in her voice. Phase spiders are nightmare creatures. They jump between the material world and the ethereal plane at will. They appear, attack, then vanish before you can react. Their venom causes paralysis too. Thankfully, my constitution had been boosted several times, so the poison barely slowed me down. But I couldn't land a single hit. I tried earth shaping to trap its feet. It teleported away. I tried mage hand behind it. It casually dodged. I tried jump slash. It disappeared the instant before impact. Every time it reappeared, it left another bloody wound on me. Fire arrows from Dane missed completely. Even if Falna's rhyme Frostbind couldn't catch it. The spider blinked away before the ice touched it. Dane noticed it was only targeting me. I figured out why. I'd eaten its queen. The spider aggro side effect from the roasted legs was drawing this thing straight to me. After several rounds of getting carved up while dealing 0 damage, I was bleeding from multiple wounds and burning with frustration. Then Ifalna shouted for me to stand still. She cast Create Water and drenched me, then swung her staff and chanted, "Aegis of Agathis." Freezing cold wrapped around me. The water on my body crystallized into glowing blue-white ice armor, covering me like a phantom shell radiating bitter cold. Almost instantly, the phase spider materialized behind me again and drove its fangs into my back. But instead of piercing flesh, it hit ice armor. A dull impact, then a sharp crack. The armor's cold damage reflection kicked in. Frost surged through the spider's body and it visibly stiffened, its movements slowing for just a fraction of a second. The shattering ice crystals burned it with additional frost damage. This time, when it tried to phase away, it was a beat too slow. That was all I needed. I exploded off the ground, jump slash. Every ounce of strength I had, plus the full weight of that 20-pound rebar, aimed downward like a falling meteor. But I layered more on top. All the rage from being toyed with, all the pain from the wounds. Furious/activated naturally, pouring my anger into the weapon as extra damage. And one more thing. Otherworld Fortune, guaranteed critical hit. 3 techniques stacked into one strike. I screamed and brought the rebar down with everything I had. The threaded coupling at its tip aimed squarely at the spider's fat, patterned abdomen. It exploded, like a water balloon hit by a sledgehammer. Green guts, shattered shell fragments, and viscous fluid sprayed across the cave wall in a radial pattern. The impact cratered the spider's remains into the ground. I rolled forward, dropped to one knee, and used the rebar as a crutch while I caught my breath. I looked at the green smear on the wall, the twitching remains on the floor, and grinned the widest grin of my life. Got you. Back at the safe room, I was patching myself up by the campfire. The herb ointment stung like crazy, but the wounds weren't as deep as they could have been. Multiple constitution boosts had saved my life. Without them, the phase spider's first ambush alone might have taken me out of the fight. Ifalna was behind me, using water control to wash the longest gash on my back. She hadn't said a word about the frostbite legs incident. Apparently near-death experiences reset grudges. Hal and Beck had finished off the elite gargoyle and came back carrying its unusually large horn with strange ice crack patterns on it. When Hal saw my wounds and the green splatter on the ground, even the veteran was shaken. He admitted it was his mistake. We'd been too close to one of the entrances leading down to floor 4, where phase spiders roam. He explained that baby phase spiders are already challenge rating 2, adults like the one I killed are rating 3, and their queens are at least rating 5. We'd have been unable to even run from one of those. I was lucky it was just a regular adult. I made a mental note. Next time I eat something that draws monster aggro, hide in town until the effect wears off. Hal told us that surviving a phase spider ambush with no casualties and actually killing it was impressive for students. I immediately redirected the credit to Ifalna. Her ice armor spell was the whole reason I got that final shot. Without the cold damage reflection freezing the spider for that split second, I'd never have caught it. Dane slumped and sighed. He felt useless. Every fire arrow missed. Burning Hands couldn't reach it. Not even an assist to his name. I told him not to beat himself up. My own spells had been equally useless against that thing. Earth Shaping, Tremor, Mage Hand. None of them even grazed it. Then Ifalna blamed herself too, saying she should have used the ice armor earlier instead of trying Rime Frostbind first. I turned to her and told her honestly that her timing had been perfect when it counted. She'd reversed the entire fight. Without her, I wouldn't have even had the chance to swing. She looked at me with those green eyes, still carrying guilt, but her shoulders relaxed a little. Hal clapped his hands and told everyone to cheer up. Nobody died, and we should count our loot. The numbers were incredible. The gathered mushrooms and fern spores from floor 3 were worth about 20 gold. Then there were 7 gargoyle horns, regular ones worth 15 to 20 gold each, and the elite's ice pattern horn was worth at least 40 gold alone as a top-tier crafting material. Plus the spider queen's poison glands and leg spines from before, and the phase spider's legs and fangs I'd just collected. Another 60 gold conservatively. Total haul, over 200 gold coins. After Hal took his agreed 50% and Beck's honey pork fund was set aside, the three of us would split over 100 gold. Not a bad trip, right? Hal grinned. Not bad at all. Over 100 gold coins each. The number made my heart skip. The pain in my back almost felt worth it. Adventuring really is insanely profitable. 3 academy students spent 3 days in a dungeon and each earned more than what an ordinary person makes in a year. Though I knew 90% of that was thanks to Beck joining us. Without him, we'd have stayed on floor 1 doing easy tasks and maybe split 10 gold each. We rested one more night in the safe room. My wounds improved a lot overnight thanks to the ointment and my boosted constitution. The next day, we headed back to Stone Creek Town. Beck stayed behind on floor 1, waiting eagerly for Hal's promised pigs and honey. A giant bear from the deep dungeon couldn't exactly stroll into town without causing mass panic. At the Adventurers Association, Hal handled the turn-in. First, the gathered mushrooms and fern spores, standard long-term collection quests. Then the spider queen parts and phase spider materials. Finally, the 7 gargoyle horns, including that ice-patterned elite horn that made even the appraiser lean in for a closer look. Other adventurers nearby whispered and stared. These were materials from monsters most of them would struggle against. The final price, 235 gold and 7 silver, even higher than Hal's estimate. While Hal counted the money, I asked the receptionist for completion certificates for the 3 of us, proof of finished quests for the academy. I handed over our identity tags, which we'd registered before the trip. The tags doubled as ID if anything happened to us in the dungeon. The receptionist came back with good news. Our adventurer rank had been upgraded from the lowest, porcelain, to oak. That meant we could take on higher-level quests independently and apparently earned extra academy credits too. Then I noticed Hal had slipped away to another counter. He'd gone to register Beck's information with the association. Apparently, they keep records of monsters that are relatively friendly and intelligent. If Beck got classified as observation level or friendly level, after they verified the report, other adventurers who encountered him wouldn't attack on sight and might even try trading with him instead. Good for Beck, good for future dungeon exploration. The association's systems were more thoughtful than I'd expected. Their adventurer ranking wasn't purely based on class level either. They factored in mission completion rate and the quality of completed tasks. The old system of restricting quests by level alone had caused problems. Inexperienced high-level fighters failing badly, while strong low-level fighters got locked out of suitable missions. The new system had significantly reduced casualty rates. With everything settled, Hal divided up the remaining errands. He'd go buy pigs at a nearby farm for Beck. Dane and Ifalna would pick up 2 big jars of thick wildflower honey for 2 gold. As for me, Hal told me to go rest since I was injured. Ifalna leaned forward and asked if she should walk me back, looking worried. I waved her off. Just minor wounds. I wasn't going to die. I headed to the inn alone. Back at the inn, I set up my alchemy gear and got to work making Molotov cocktails. The process was second nature by now. Distill cheap liquor, collect the alcohol, mix with kerosene, seal the bottles, wrap the wicks. My alchemy pioneer trait seemed to help. The alcohol came out purer this time. I made a full crate for Hal plus a few spares for myself. Soon Dane and Ifalna showed up lugging 2 massive clay jars of wildflower honey, each nearly half as tall as a person. The sweet smell instantly overwhelmed the room's lingering alcohol and medicine odors. Hal arrived shortly after, having wrangled 5 fat black pigs through town. Quite a sight, apparently. Then came the moment we'd all been waiting for. Hal dumped the remaining gold coins onto the table. The golden pile gleaming under the lamplight was mesmerizing. Hearing about 100+ gold coins is one thing, but seeing them piled in front of you hits completely different. Hal split the pile in half and swept his share into a bag. Fair deal, as agreed. Then things got complicated. Dane said he only wanted 10 gold. I looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He insisted he'd been useless during the big fights and only helped with gathering tasks. I argued that we were a team with different roles. He'd burned small spiders, done gathering work, carried gear the whole trip. I told him to take 30. He refused so hard he threatened to never adventure with me again if I forced 30 on him. I gave in at 20. Ifalna said she only wanted 22, blaming herself for not using the ice armor sooner and letting me get hurt. I told her that was ridiculous. She'd literally reversed the entire phase spider fight. I counted out 40 gold coins and pushed them in front of her. She hesitated, looked at the coins, looked at me, and finally accepted with a quiet from the window. Hal watched us argue over who deserved less money, and I caught a strange look in his eyes, something nostalgic and bittersweet, like he was remembering teammates from long ago. Then Hal walked over and pushed 20 more gold coins toward me from his own share. He said it was compensation for his mistake. He'd forgotten there was a floor 4 entrance nearby, and the phase spider attack was his oversight. He added with a self-deprecating smile that he was ashamed to be a druid who couldn't heal. His old party had a cleric, and his wild shape could self-heal, so he'd never bothered learning restoration magic. I tried to refuse, but he shut me down with one look. I took the money. The weight of those coins somehow made my back hurt a little less. After everything was settled, I pulled out the wooden crate of Molotov cocktails I'd prepared. Hal's eyes lit up. He grabbed one bottle, examined it like a precious gem, then hugged the whole crate to his chest. I told him the instructions were simple: light the wick and throw. My final count, 51 gold and 7 silver. Combined with what I already had, I was richer than I'd ever been in either life. On the bumpy carriage ride back to the academy, I was jingling my much lighter coin purse and sighing about how fast money disappears. The celebration dinner at the Wildfire Tavern had cost 3 gold. I'd gone all out ordering every signature monster dish, plus the barrels of ale and mead that Hal insisted on. One meal cost what I'd normally spend in 2 months. Unthinkable in my previous life as a wage slave. But the real damage happened the day after, when Dane and I explored the Adventurers Association's trading district. The spell materials section was reasonable. I restocked on essentials like the silver wire and tiny bells needed for alarm, spending 5 gold total. I also picked up a basic short dagger for 1 gold and 3 silver, useful for cutting valuable parts off defeated monsters. The armor section was tempting. Basic leather armor ran 5 to 10 gold, while scale and chainmail went for 50 to 100. I didn't see any full plate armor. Those are apparently custom-made to order. I was briefly tempted by a set of scale mail, but remembered that heavy armor interferes with spellcasting gestures. Since everyone thinks I'm a mage, I passed. The potion section nearly gave me a heart attack. The cheapest healing potion, basic wound treatment for minor injuries, cost 10 gold. A universal resistance elixir that briefly protects against all elements, toxins, and even mental attacks was 200 gold. For a single-use item. Enchanted jewelry was even worse. A plain ring with just a feather fall effect, 60 gold. I looked at the feathers tucked in my spellbook and felt personally insulted. The showpiece was a massive enchanted greatsword with a once-daily third circle dispel magic, priced at 1,780 gold. I nearly fainted. No wonder adventurers earn a fortune but never seem rich. The money comes fast, but it leaves faster. I ended up buying 2 things, a basic healing potion for 10 gold and a hill giant strength elixir for 30. The strength elixir temporarily boosts strength by 3 points, capped at 21, but drops intelligence below 10 during the effect. Since my intelligence was already 9, that penalty barely mattered. Best of all, there was a chance of permanently gaining a giant strength trait afterward, worth every coin. My 70+ gold had shrunk to 23. When the academy spires came into view, I put the money worries aside. Back in my musty dorm room, I stood before the mirror and checked my status. Arcane Warrior, level 2. 3 first circle spell slots now. 2 combat techniques, Furious Slash and Jump Slash. My full collection of cantrips and first circle spells. The Alchemy Pioneer trait. The gold came and went, but the real treasure from this trip was the level up. At level 2, I should be able to start learning second circle spells. My eyes lingered on, intelligence, 9, and my smile faded into a sigh. When was that number ever going to go up? Back at the academy, life slowed down. The dungeon thrills faded, and I settled back into studying magic. After submitting my practical course assignments, I got a new class schedule. My first advanced course was in a different rock and nature classroom. Ground floor this time, spacious with a 5-meter ceiling and floors made of different colored soils and rocks. I noticed the class looked different. A lot of my fellow first years were gone, replaced by older students with tired, weathered expressions. The mood was a mix of excitement from newly promoted level 2 mages like me and a kind of defeated weariness from the upperclassmen. I recognized that vibe immediately. It was the aura of students who'd failed and were retaking the course. Brooke had explained the system to me before. Cantrips and first circle spells are taught for free. They're fundamentals every mage needs. But starting at second circle, the academy charges tuition per spell. Want to learn Earth Wall? That's 5 gold coins. The difficulty jumps sharply at this level, and the gap between talented and average students becomes obvious. The upside is you only pay once and can keep attending until you learn it. That's why older students were mixed in with us. They hadn't mastered it yet, and were still trying. Fair system, but it quietly sorts people by ability. Brooke walked in, muscles gleaming as always, and announced today's lesson. Earth Wall, one of the signature spells for Earth Mages. Before starting, he asked everyone to show their chosen soil, the casting material that would shape their wall's properties. Students called out their choices: hometown clay, black swamp mud, limestone powder, yellow sand. When Brooke reached me, he stopped and stared at my setup: a pile of sand, gravel, a large water pouch, and a heap of gray-white powder. What is this stuff? A soil I mixed myself. I call it concrete. He raised an eyebrow at the unfamiliar word. Nearby upperclassmen looked curious too. I kept my explanation brief. A blended material that gets very hard after setting. Brooke didn't press for details. He cared about results. He then launched into a thorough lesson on Earth Wall's 3 components. First, an ancient, tongue-twisting incantation that channels Earth elemental energy. He recited it slowly several times so we could feel the magical resonance between syllables. Second, the soil. You pour magic into your chosen material, which then acts as a medium to draw surrounding earth and stone into a wall sharing that material's properties. Third, a complex set of hand gestures, staff planted in the ground, free hand weaving the magic web in the air, then a powerful upward lift like throwing open a warehouse shutter. He demonstrated the full combination: incantation, gestures, and a sharp upward motion, all perfectly synchronized. Earth wall, a solid, textured dirt wall erupted from the ground, 2 meters tall, 4 or 5 meters long, radiating a heavy earth elemental presence. He slapped it, and it rang with a deep, solid thud. Then it was our turn. I had to prepare my concrete first, using earth shaping to quickly mix the sand, gravel, and cement powder, then adding water and controlling the mixture until it formed a proper gray slurry. After that, I tried the spell. The incantation felt clumsy and awkward in my mouth. The hand gestures were stiff, nothing like Brooks' fluid movements. Second circle spells were exponentially more complex than first circle. The magic web structure was several times more intricate, and the mana cost jumped dramatically. I stumbled partway through and had to stop. Wait, what did the magic web look like again? I need to check the textbook. I quickly learned that second circle spells are on a completely different level. Earth Wall is a simplified version of the fifth circle stone wall. I mentally called it the Ultra Mega Simplified Mini Youth Edition Stone Wall. Even simplified, it was enormously more complex than anything I'd learned before. I planted my rebar staff into the concrete slurry as an anchor point, started chanting the clunky incantation, and tried weaving the intricate magic web with my free hand while following the textbook. After over a dozen failed attempts, I finally got the gestures and incantation roughly right, but my mana output was unstable. The wall I produced was only half a meter tall, crooked, and immediately collapsed into a puddle that splashed gray slurry all over my pants. Second circle spells drained way more mana than I expected. Several failures in, and I was exhausted. Looking around, most students were struggling too. Only a few veteran retakers had managed shaky little walls that looked ready to topple. Successfully casting a second circle spell would mean reaching level 3 as a caster. Sounds simple, but it's a barrier some mages never cross in their entire lives. Luckily, Earth Wall shared principles with my well-practiced earth-shaping cantrip. Both involve controlling and molding soil. I calmed down, stopped rushing, and focused on feeling the connection between my mana and the concrete. Hours of grinding later, everything clicked. The incantation flowed smoothly, the gestures connected seamlessly, and mana surged through my staff into the concrete. A gray-white wall rose from the ground, sharp-edged, properly shaped, standing firm. I was one of the very few students who succeeded on day one. But my excitement lasted about 10 seconds. The wall hadn't hardened. It was wet and soft. I poked it, and my fingers sank right in. It had the defensive capability of a giant block of tofu. My concrete mix was designed for C30 grade, which needs time to cure. I'd assumed magic would accelerate that or give it temporary magical strength. Neither happened. Some upperclassmen snickered. Every year there's some clever freshman who tries to get creative. Brooke shut them up with a sharp word. I ignored the mockery and focused on the problem. How could I speed up the hardening? Then something accidental happened. I wiped sweat off my forehead and touched the wall. Where my palm made contact, a visible gray-white ripple spread outward. The wet, soft surface rapidly darkened and hardened into something rock-solid, a stark contrast to the mushy wall around it. My brain buzzed. Sweat contains salt. Salt acts as an early-strength accelerant for concrete. Chloride salts like calcium chloride or sodium chloride dramatically speed up early curing. The salt from my sweat had accidentally catalyzed the hardening. How had I forgotten something so basic? I immediately channeled mana through my staff into the entire wall, but this time with a deliberate, catalyzing intention, mentally guiding the magic to mimic what the salt had done, penetrating every tiny pore. Starting from the bottom, the wall's color shifted from wet dark gray to dry light gray. The texture visibly hardened and densified in real time. Within seconds, a truly solid concrete wall stood before me. Rough-surfaced, but unmistakably sturdy, radiating a bedrock-like solidity completely different from the ordinary dirt walls everyone else was making. The notification appeared. Earth Wall learned, level 1, proficiency 1 out of 5. A second circle spell that creates a wall whose properties and durability depend on the material used. If I maintained concentration long enough, the The wall would become permanent until physically destroyed. I'd done it. My first second circle spell, and it was made of concrete. The instant hardening of my wall drew every eye in the room, including Brooks. He marched over and knocked on the wall with his knuckles. The sound that came back was deep and solid, completely different from the dull thud of normal dirt walls. He punched it harder. The wall didn't budge, leaving only a faint white mark. Meanwhile, an upperclassman's limestone wall nearby crumbled a bit just from the vibrations, which was embarrassing for that guy. Brooks circled my wall, examining the texture. Uniform, rough, clearly not natural soil or rock. He asked where I got this material, but I didn't hear him. I was staring at the notifications flooding my vision. Learning a second circle spell had triggered another level up. I was now level 3. I gained 2 second circle spell slots and 1 more first circle slot. But the big thing was a choice. My class needed to specialize. A long list of subclass options appeared: Rune Warrior, Spell Breaker, Arcane Conqueror, Earth Guardian, Echo Fighter, and many more. So, Arcane Warrior was apparently a general category, and these were the specific paths underneath it. The General Studies textbook had mentioned this. Most class holders pick a specialization at level 2 or 3, getting unique bonuses based on their choice. Like Hal's Druid class had dozens of circles to choose from, and he'd picked the Circle of the Moon, earning his bear transformation at level 2. If everything had gone normally, I would have just become a standard Earth Mage like the Academy planned. But my combat techniques had derailed that path entirely. The options were overwhelming. I started reading through them, completely zoning out. Mori. Brooke was shaking my shoulders violently. I snapped back to reality. Right, I was still in class. Bad timing for career planning. He asked again about my material. I told him it was something I'd accidentally created during an alchemy experiment over the holiday. Just a small achievement, I said casually. The upperclassmen who'd mocked me earlier exchanged dark looks. They'd given me the perfect setup to show off. Brooke didn't care about the room's mood. He was completely fixated. Did I have more samples? I pulled spare bags of cement, sand, and gravel from my backpack. He grabbed them like precious treasures. Then I made a mistake. I started explaining the mixing ratios and how different proportions could produce materials suited for different types of construction. Brooke's eyes went wide. I'd revealed too much knowledge about something I supposedly stumbled upon by accident. My 9-point intelligence striking again. I sometimes talk without thinking. I backpedaled frantically, saying I'd just experimented with ratios during the holiday to test effects, and the construction applications part was pure speculation. Brooke stared at me in silence long enough for cold sweat to form on my back. Then he burst out laughing, slapped my shoulder hard enough to rattle my teeth, and declared me a genius. You were born for this. I hereby name you the innate Earth Saint. My vision went dark. Memories of construction sites, concrete pouring, and endless misery crashed over me like a tidal wave. I forced the words through clenched teeth. Thank you so much for the compliment, teacher. He completely missed my tone. You deserve it. Come with me, right now, he grabbed my wrist like a steel clamp and dragged me out of the classroom toward the alchemy lab, demanding I tell him every ratio I'd tested so he could document everything. I didn't even get a chance to protest. Behind us, the classroom buzzed with whispers and stares. I stumbled back to my dorm late at night, collapsing face first into the pillow. My body wasn't that tired. Constitution 14 handles physical strain fine, but my soul was exhausted. Brooke had dragged me to his lab and kept me there for 10 straight hours. The place was a chaotic mix of alchemy workshop and quarry, now featuring my concrete as the star attraction. He'd gone absolutely obsessive, testing different mix ratios, adding monster materials as additives, injecting mana to observe reactions, recording every detail. I'd suggested making standardized test blocks for easier comparison and showed him how kerosene works as a mold release agent. After that, he looked at me like I was a national treasure. By the time he finally let me go, he'd sentenced me to daily lab visits for the next 2 weeks. I deeply regretted ever inventing concrete, but I had something more important to deal with. The class specialization choice I'd been interrupted from making earlier. I dragged myself to the mirror. The long list of subclass options reappeared: Rune Warrior, Spell Breaker, Arcane Conqueror, Earth Guardian, Echo Fighter, and more. I started eliminating. Rune Warrior required permanently tattooing magical symbols onto my body. Absolutely not. I couldn't even handle tattoos in movies from my past life. Spellbreaker offered amazing magic resistance, but weakened my own spellcasting. That defeated the purpose entirely. After filtering, 2 options remained. Arcane Conqueror, Intelligence +1, Strength +1. Its unique talent, Conquest Blessing, grants a random bonus attribute point every time you level up. A growth-oriented choice with huge long-term potential. Advancement requires upgrading any combat technique to level 2 and learning a second circle transmutation spell. Earth Guardian, Intelligence +1, Constitution +1. Its unique talent, Earth's Protection, reduces physical damage and temporarily boosts strength by 1 while touching the ground. Immediate combat power, perfect for my physical fighting style with the heavy rebar staff. Advancement requires upgrading any combat technique to level 2 and learning a second circle abjuration spell. Both gave intelligence +1. Finally, an escape from Sir 9 intelligence. Then I had a wild idea. Both paths required upgrading a combat technique to level 2. My jump slash was nearly there already. The only difference was the spell type, transmutation versus abjuration. What if I learned both types of second circle spells before upgrading the technique? Could I satisfy both conditions simultaneously and dual specialize? The panel didn't say I could do that, but it didn't say I couldn't either. My heart raced. Even if it turned out to be impossible, learning more spells was never a waste. Abjuration spells were clearly useful for survival. I'd already planned to learn one. I just needed to figure out what second circle transmutation spells existed. Tomorrow, library first thing. Early morning, I dragged myself to the library with obvious dark circles under my eyes. I'd barely slept, my brain churning over spell choices all night. I needed 2 types of second circle spells, 1 abjuration, 1 transmutation, preferably earth or nature school, and affordable for a broke new adventurer. The abjuration spell was easy to find. I pulled out a general second circle spell reference and a druid spellbook and quickly settled on Barkskin, a nature-type protection spell that temporarily hardens the target's skin to the toughness of tree bark, basically giving you a suit of armor. The casting material was just a bit of oak bark. Simple, practical, and the book even included the full magic web diagram. Perfect. Transmutation spells were harder. I flipped through pages of options feeling unsatisfied. Disguise Self could adjust your facial features to impersonate other humanoid races, but I couldn't think of any urgent need for disguises. Enhance Attribute was more interesting. It temporarily boosts any one of your 6 stats. Extremely versatile, whether you need burst strength for combat or extra charisma for negotiation. The downside was it required different materials for each attribute: bear fur, cat fur, bull hair, and was noted as particularly difficult to learn. I was stuck between the 2 when a familiar voice broke my concentration. Ifalna was standing a few steps away, holding an enormous spellbook, her green eyes smiling. She said running into me here wasn't really a coincidence. She came to the library almost every day. Her school's instructor had given her special permission to study independently because her learning pace was, in her words, a little bit faster than normal. Some spells she wanted to research weren't even in her teacher's expertise. I tried to keep my face neutral, but internally I was reeling. Most mages struggle painfully with second circle spells. Some need to retake courses multiple times. And she was casually self-studying? I asked about the 2 spells I was considering. She said she'd studied both. She dropped Disguise Self because the skin-stretching effect during transformation causes temporary wrinkles afterward. She'd mastered Enhance Attribute, but warned me it requires learning 6 different magic web configurations, 1 per stat. It took her 3 days to master all 6 forms. 3 days didn't sound bad. Then I asked how long other second circle spells usually took her. A few hours usually. Half a day for the complex ones. I wanted to scream. Even with my panel's instant mastery feature and earth and wood affinity, I'd spent half a day just getting my first successful cast of Earth Wall. She was learning multiple second circle spells per day. I sighed and asked if she had any other transmutation spell recommendations, something better suited to me specifically. Ifalna studied me carefully, her eyes lingering on my increasingly muscular build and the rebar staff leaning against the table. She seemed to recall how I'd fought in the dungeon. A strange expression crossed her face. Let me think. She took the reference book from my hands, flipped through the index, and stopped on one entry. I'd suggest you look at this one. Enlarge/reduce? The name rang a faint bell, but I hadn't looked into it closely before. Ifalna explained it clearly. The spell doubles your body size when enlarged, making it easier to land critical hits. When reduced, you shrink to half size, 1/8 the volume, becoming more agile but dealing less damage. Your clothing and weapons scale with you, but anything that leaves your body returns to normal size. The best part, it only has one magic web structure, with enlarge and reduce just being forward and reverse versions of the same weave. It was perfect. Useful on myself, usable on teammates, and potentially amazing combined with the hill giant strength elixir I'd bought. Decision made. I thanked Ifalna and headed straight to the course registration center. A busy stone hall, students lined up submitting study plans. When my turn came, I handed over 2 applications, Barkskin and Enlarge/Reduce. The clerk approved Barkskin immediately. 5 gold tuition, class starting next week with a druid instructor. Then he frowned at the second form. Enlarge/Reduce was too obscure. Only 3 applicants including me. Academy rules required a minimum of 10 students to run a class. My only options were private tutoring at 50 gold coins per spell, with no guarantee of mastery, or self-study from library books at my own risk. 50 gold. I nearly choked. After my dungeon earnings, equipment purchases, and Barkskin tuition, I had less than 20 gold left. No wonder Ifalna self-studied in the library. These private lesson fees were highway robbery. I enrolled in Barkskin only, painfully counting out 5 gold coins onto the counter. While waiting for class to start, Brooke continued dragging me to his lab daily for concrete experiments. His obsessive research was actually producing results. We discovered that mixing in slime gel created incredibly dense, waterproof concrete. I called the gel a retarding agent, since it also drastically slowed the setting time. Gargoyle body and wing powder worked as an excellent accelerator, making concrete set extremely fast without magic. But the experiments burned through materials quickly, and Brooke pressured me into surrendering my 2 remaining bags of cement from Stone Creek. After 3 days of forced lab work, Barkskin class finally started. The instructor was a calm young druid from the Circle of the Land, a traditional branch focused on ancient knowledge and earth-connected magic. Very different from Hal's wild Circle of the Moon style. He explained that Barkskin channels natural life force to construct a tough bark-like layer over the skin, boosting defense significantly, comparable to expensive armor. The material needed was just a handful of oak bark. The theory sounded straightforward, but actually casting it was another story. By the end of class, I still hadn't managed a successful cast. Neither had most students. Only a handful succeeded near the very end. More practice needed. As always, after a full week of practice squeezed between Brooke's relentless lab sessions, I finally learned Barkskin. The spell made my skin rough like tree bark, significantly boosting my resistance to slashing, piercing, and blunt damage. I tested my movement. No restrictions at all. Next time I ran into a phase spider, at least it couldn't carve me up so easily. The moment I walked out of class feeling great, Brooke intercepted me. The 2 bags of cement I'd brought back were all used up. He wanted me to go to Stone Creek Town with him to find more raw materials. I desperately tried to wriggle out of it. I'd been doing unpaid overtime in his lab for 10 straight days and was mentally exhausted. I pointed out that I'd already given him the formula and the quarry location was easy to find. He grabbed my shoulders with terrifying strength. My strength was 14 now, but he was clearly at least 16 or 17. I wasn't going anywhere he didn't want me to. Eventually, I talked him into going alone by arguing someone needed to maintain the lab and organize the research data. But he countered by assigning me to write patent applications for our concrete findings. Patents. The word hit me strangely. I'd never heard it in this world before. Brooke explained that the Helson Kingdom had established an intellectual property registration system about 10 years ago, proposed by a Duke Ratal. Whoever registers first owns the rights, and anyone wanting to use or produce the invention pays the creator. Duke Ratal. Could he be another transmigrator like me? I quietly filed that name away for future investigation. Brooke left for Stone Creek, and I finally had the lab to myself. Time to self-study Enlarge/Reduce. I was brimming with confidence. Earth Wall took me half a day. Barkskin took a week while juggling lab work. Without Brooke dragging me away constantly, surely I could master this spell in a week tops. If Fauna self-studied spells from books all the time. If she could do it, so could I. I opened the textbook and studied the magic web diagrams. The actual web is three-dimensional, but books can only show it as flat cross-sections from multiple angles. A little tricky, but it's only the beginning, I told myself. Day 7 arrived, my planned success date. I stood in the lab with bird's nest hair, staring at the floor covered in failed experiments. Cracked rocks, twisted wood pieces, metal chunks warped into bizarre shapes by uneven shrinking. I couldn't even make a target change size uniformly, let alone with any precision. Comparing myself to a fauna had been a catastrophic miscalculation. She was a genius. I had 9 intelligence. Frustrated and desperate for a mental break, I remembered Brooke's patent assignment. I went to his desk, opened the second drawer, and pulled out the reference files. As I started reading, my eyebrows slowly knitted together. These were actual successful patent documents filed by other academy instructors. I opened the first patent reference document Brooke left me. It had an absurdly long title about slime powder and Sharkman scales, improving a third circle blizzard spell. The content was simple, but the formatting was a mess. It read like a padded academic paper stuffed with filler. The next one was all about deep earth element theory with the actual improvement barely explained. It just claimed a roughly 7% increase, without saying how. The third was packed with ancient elvish word roots, complex alchemy symbols, and impossibly long sentences. Pure gibberish. These so-called patents were either deliberately vague about the key details or just badly written nonsense. If this garbage could pass review, I could definitely do better. I sat down and started writing. In my past life, I'd been forced to cobble together patents for my construction company's innovation targets. Back then I'd thought patents were something lofty and unreachable. Then I learned the truth. Many patents, papers, and utility models were about as prestigious as certain street corner services. Pay enough and you're in. Since I actually knew concrete inside and out, I finished the patent drafts in a single day. Title: a highly versatile new construction material, way more professional than anything in those reference files. Then I went back to studying enlarge/reduce. 3 weeks later, I looked like a zombie, bloodshot eyes, gaunt face, hundreds of failed attempts behind me. The lab floor was littered with cracked rocks, twisted wood pieces, and grotesquely warped metal chunks from uneven size changes. Without my earth and wood affinity talent boosting me, learning spells was agonizingly slow. Earth Wall took half a day because it was earth magic. Barkskin took a week because it was nature magic. But enlarge/reduce was pure transmutation. No affinity bonus, just raw 9-point intelligence grinding against a complex spell. 1 full month of suffering. Then, on one final attempt, I aimed at a surviving wooden block. The magic flowed through the pattern I'd burned into muscle memory. The block started expanding, smoothly, evenly, no twisting, no cracking. Enlarge/reduce, learned. Level 1, proficiency 1 out of 5. There was no celebration, just hollow, exhausted relief. I now had both spells needed for dual specialization, Barkskin for Earth Guardian, enlarge/reduce for Arcane Conqueror. All I needed was to upgrade jump/ to level 2. Daily training barely moved the proficiency needle, so I'd need real combat. Time for another trip to Stone Creek Town and the dungeon. My wallet was nearly empty again too. As I was planning, someone knocked on the lab door. I figured it was Brooke returning from his month-long trip to Stone Creek. I opened the door and saw nothing. Down here, kid. A gruff, nasal voice came from below. I looked down and saw a massive rust-red beard hanging almost to the floor, and above it, a gleaming bald head. A dwarf showed up at the lab door. He only came up to my waist, but was built like a tank. Leather armor stained with grease, a round black shield on his back, and a magnificent rust-red beard hanging almost to the floor. His name was Bakov Copperbard. Brooke had sent him with a message. Come to Stone Creek Town immediately, bring the concrete test blocks, and my written documents. I was surprised Brooke was still there after a month, but the timing actually worked. The semester was ending, and I needed to visit the dungeon anyway to level up my jump/technique. I agreed to go. Bakov had brought transportation, but it wasn't a horse-drawn carriage. Parked across the street was something that made my jaw drop, a crude mechanical vehicle built from oak framing, brass gears, copper linkages, steel pipes, and wide wooden wheels with metal hubs. It had a spacious cargo bed in the back. A pickup truck? I blurted out. What kind of stupid name is that? Bakov snapped proudly. This is the Lightning self-propelled cart, latest invention from our steel furnace fortress's grand artificer. It was powered by an electric fluorite crystal, a fist-sized yellow-green cube that stores electrical energy. Lightning-type casters can charge it using a cantrip, and it releases a steady current based on its size. Essentially a natural battery. The technology hadn't spread widely because lightning casters are extremely rare, but the fact that someone had built a working electric vehicle from it was genuinely impressive. The ride was faster than a horse cart, but felt like an old tractor, bone-rattling the entire way. After half a day of being shaken to pieces, we arrived at Stone Creek Town and headed toward the old quarry. When I got out and looked up, I froze. Where Dane and I had built our crude little kiln on empty ground, there now stood a brand-new single-story building. Gray-white walls, rough but solid, with sharp, clean edges. Above the entrance hung a fresh wooden sign, Grid Cement Factory. So that's what Brooke had been doing for a month. He'd built an entire factory. The heavy doors swung open, and Brooke's massive frame appeared. He spotted me, grinned, marched over, and slapped my shoulder with his usual crushing force. He said he'd found some issues with the concrete and needed my help researching them. Bakov overheard and nearly choked. You're telling me you need to do research with this kid? You said he's been enrolled less than half a year. Brooke laughed and pointed at the cement factory walls. Didn't I mention? The material this building is made of, he invented it. Bakov's eyes went wide. He stared at me, then at the solid concrete walls, then back at me. The dwarf went silent for a long moment. Among dwarves, inventors and innovators earn natural respect regardless of age or race. He finally grunted. You could have told me sooner, Brooke. Brooke dragged me inside the cement factory. It was impressive. Several massive brick kilns lined up neatly, far grander than the little clay oven Dane and I had cobbled together. The air was hot and dusty, smelling of burnt stone. Several people in yellow robes were hauling materials around, and I recognized some as upperclassmen from the academy. So I wasn't the only one Brooke had conscripted. That made me feel slightly better. Brooke pulled me to an interior wall and pointed at the surface, frowning. The concrete had defects, small holes, dents, and one patch covered in tiny porous openings like a honeycomb. I recognized the problem instantly. These were classic concrete quality issues: honeycomb, pitting, and voids. In my past life, every construction worker learned about these on day one. The cause was simple: insufficient vibration during pouring, leaving air bubbles trapped inside. I have some ideas, I said, catching myself before blurting out that this was basic knowledge. I explained that the materials weren't mixed evenly enough and air wasn't being expelled during placement. The solution was vibration, shaking the wet concrete rapidly and uniformly to compact it and force out air bubbles. Brooke lit up and called me a genius. I smiled bitterly. This was literally the most fundamental thing in concrete work. Then Brooke suddenly turned to Bakov and shouted, "Go catch me some live goblins." Both Bakov and I were completely confused. The dwarf asked why anyone would want those green little wretches. Brooke just bellowed about needing vibration equipment and told us to hurry. I had no idea how goblins related to vibration tools. Was Brooke planning to use them as manual laborers? Before I could ask, Bakov grabbed my arm and hauled me outside. The dwarf pulled out a greasy copy of the Stone Creek Adventurer's Handbook and checked the monster distribution maps. Floors 1 through 3 had no fixed goblin locations. Local adventurers killed them on site to prevent raids on nearby farms. Bakov suggested going straight into the dungeon to find some in undiscovered corners. Through our conversation on the way, I learned Bakov was a level 6 arcane knight, a warrior subclass that combines fighting with spellcasting. He discovered his rare lightning affinity only after reaching level 3, which led him to that class path. His casting ability was modest though. He could still only manage first circle spells. This worked perfectly for me. I needed real combat to level up my jump/slash technique, and hunting goblins in the dungeon was exactly the kind of practice I was looking for. Bakov was clearly experienced and confident. An old-school adventurer, as he proudly declared, puffing out his chest with his massive beard bristling. I agreed to follow his lead. and we headed for the dungeon entrance. On the way to the dungeon, I asked Bakov how he knew Brooke. He laughed and told me they'd adventured together years ago, before Brooke joined the academy. They'd raided ruins and fought monsters as a team. Brooke was tough and could throw rocks with magic, while Bakov liked cooking the monsters they killed. That's when I noticed the big round black thing on his back wasn't actually a shield. It was an iron cooking pot. He said it doubled as a shield too. Apparently Brooke was one of the few humans who could stomach Bakov's secret stew, which is why they got along. Elves wouldn't even taste it. We entered the dungeon. Without Beck's intimidating presence this time, we actually had to fight some low-level creatures. Bakov smashed 2 acid slimes with his hammer, 1 swing each, juice everywhere. I handled 3 armored beetles by trapping them with earth shaping and pelting them with magic stone, my 4th cantrip that I'd never actually used in real combat before. I called it true rock-throwing magic. Floor 1 was too quiet for goblins, so we descended to floor 2. Bakov crouched down and found tracks in the dirt, wide, splayed toes, with a foul stench. Bugbears. They're bigger, hairier cousins of goblins, and they often live together with regular goblins. Perfect. We followed the tracks for about 15 minutes until we heard fighting ahead. Roaring, shrieking, the sounds of combat. We rounded a massive stalagmite and found an open clearing. 7 or 8 bugbears were swarming a single fighter. But that lone figure was dancing between their clubs and claws with incredible agility. Silver-white hair, a curved bow, clearly female, a ranger. I was amazed she'd dare fight at close range with hair that long. One grab from a bugbear, and she'd be pinned down. One bugbear spotted us approaching and yelled to the others. Their attacks grew more frenzied. The leader, nearly 3 meters tall, muscles bulging, tusks jutting out, swung a massive stone-studded club at the ranger. For the first time I could see her face clearly. She was strikingly beautiful and shockingly young. She didn't try to block the club. Instead, she bent backward in an impossible limbo dodge, rolled along the ground, sprang back up, and kicked the leader square in the face while it was still recovering from its swing. While the bugbear stumbled back, she used the momentum of her kick to launch into a backflip. Mid-air, upside down, hair flying everywhere, she pulled an arrow from her quiver, knocked it, drew the bow to full moon, and released. The arrow flew like a silver streak straight into the roaring bugbear leader's wide-open mouth and out the back of its skull. It swayed and crashed to the ground. The whole sequence was fluid, effortless, and devastatingly cool. It reminded me of a famous character from a game in my past life, controlled by a player people called God. So naturally, the words that left my mouth were, "Holy crap, what a sick tumbleweed." It wasn't meant as an insult. In my head it was pure admiration, but the ranger's pointed ears twitched. She whipped around, silver-gray eyes locking onto me instantly, filled with shock, disbelief, and blazing fury. Her beautiful face flushed red with anger. I'd done it again. "What did you say?" The ranger girl bit out each word like shards of ice. My comment had distracted her just enough for a bugbear to take a swing. She dodged in time. Barely, the club whistling past her shoulder and clipping a few strands of silver hair. Bakov, instead of helping, doubled over laughing so hard tears streamed into his beard. "Tumbleweed. Kid, that nickname is perfect. How did I never think of that?" I blinked, slowly realizing what I'd done. I'd meant it as genuine praise, but, yeah, I slapped my own forehead. The ranger, apparently named Lomia, based on Bakov shouting her name, threatened to rip out his beard and string her bow with it if he didn't shut up. Then she pointed at me and said I should wait until she was done with these bugbears. She clearly knew Bakov already, and she clearly didn't need our help. Or so she claimed while having to dodge another attack with slightly shakier footwork than before. My comment had rattled her focus. Great. First time meeting, and I'd already made an enemy. I suggested to Bakov that we help anyway. He agreed with exaggerated reluctance, then launched himself like a cannonball. His square-headed warhammer came down with brutal force on the nearest bugbear. Shoulder and skull caved in simultaneously. The thing dropped without a sound. I reached for my own trick. Instead of earth-shaping, which would mess up the terrain for allies too, I pulled out a small pouch from my belt, one of the research products Brooke and I had developed. Pre-mixed cement powder, sand, and salt. I scattered it on the ground, poured water from my canteen, and cast earth wall. A solid gray-white concrete wall erupted from the ground, cutting off 3 charging bugbears from our side of the fight. The wall hardened almost instantly thanks to the salt accelerant. With the battlefield split, pressure dropped immediately. Bakov went wild with his hammer, smashing another bugbear to pieces. Lomia nailed one through the eye socket with a precise arrow. The 3 trapped bugbears pounded on the wall furiously. It shook and shed some dust, but held firm. I decided to get some combat practice in. I targeted one of the remaining bugbears on our side, leaping forward with a jump slash, imitating Bakov's technique of driving power from the ground through the core. My rebar staff slammed into its back with a meaty thud. The bugbear coughed pink foam and collapsed. No proficiency notification. Probably because a single bugbear wasn't enough of a threat for a level 3 fighter to gain skill experience from. Bakov finished his last target and stared at me, surprised. You know that move too? Kid, your style is pretty wild for a mage. Before I could explain my complicated class situation, the concrete wall finally crumbled under the trapped bugbear's relentless pounding. 3 red-eyed bugbears burst through, then froze. All their companions were dead, and 3 pairs of eyes were staring right at them. They turned to run. I chased after them. If 1 bugbear wasn't enough for proficiency, maybe 3 would be. An arrow whistled past me and pinned one to the ground. Okay, 2 would work too. Stop right there. An angry voice snapped behind me. They're not going to listen to you, I muttered. I'm talking to you. A slender but surprisingly strong hand clamped onto my arm. I turned around and found myself face to face with the ranger girl, Lomia, based on what Bakov had called her. Up close, she was stunning. Silver-white hair like a moonlit waterfall, delicate features, silver-gray eyes blazing with fury, and long pointed ears poking through her hair. She was an elf. What did you mean by tumbleweed? She demanded, each word dripping with barely contained rage. My brain kicked into emergency mode. I took a deep breath and launched into the most sincere-sounding explanation I could invent on the spot. I told her that when I was a kid, a traveling bard had passed through my village and told stories about a legendary ranger hero from a distant western kingdom. That hero's signature move was a breathtaking ground-rolling combat technique. Fast as lightning, fierce yet elegant. I said I'd always dreamed of learning it, and that was actually why I'd started studying combat skills despite being a mage. I told her that watching her dodge the bugbear leader had been exactly like the bard's description. So perfect that I blurted out the hero's title without thinking. I apologized sincerely and bowed slightly. Lomia's anger visibly deflated. She studied my face for signs of lying, but I kept my expression perfectly earnest and unblinking. She released my arm and looked away, the tips of her pointed ears turning faintly pink. Fine, but that name is horrible. Never call me that again. She paused, then added with a reluctant air. As for that rolling technique you want to learn, depending on your behavior, maybe I could teach you someday. I thanked her enthusiastically, relieved that my story had worked. Then Bakov ruined everything by bursting into laughter again, shouting that tumbleweed was the perfect nickname for her regardless of its origin. Lomia exploded at him. Is that how you talk to your elders? I held you in my arms when you were a baby. Bakov's laughter choked off instantly. His face went purple with embarrassment. I looked between them, thoroughly confused. She looked 17 at most. Bakov had a full beard and was 46 years old. Lomia explained with elven pride. Bakov was only 46. His family had visited her elven homeland when he was a crawling toddler, and she'd literally carried him around. His ancestors' clan chief was sworn brothers with her grandfather, making Bakov some absurdly distant great-great-great-grandnephew of hers. Despite looking like a teenager, she was apparently much older than the middle-aged dwarf, and technically not even an adult yet by elven standards. Bakov sputtered back to life, insisting that dwarves are fully grown men at 30, unlike certain elves who'd been alive for ages and still hadn't finished developing. Then Lomia pulled out what she claimed was an Eastern proverb she'd read in an ancient book. Long story short, she explained it meant, tall elves' words become distorted when they come out of a dwarf's mouth, basically calling Bakov incapable of saying anything intelligent. I stared at her blankly. That was absolutely not what, long story short, means. But I had to admire her creativity in weaponizing made-up etymology. I jumped between the two of them before the argument spiraled further, reminding everyone that 2 bugbears had escaped and we should go after them. Lomia scoffed and said they couldn't escape. She'd already placed Hunter's Mark on them, a signature ranger spell, and could track them within range. She was a shadow stalker, a ranger subclass I'd never encountered before. Once her mood improved, she was surprisingly easy to talk to. She asked how I knew Bakov. Before I could answer, the dwarf jumped in and introduced me as Brooke's student, bragging that I could even optimize spells. He pointed out that the concrete wall I'd cast earlier was my improved version of Earth Wall. Lomia gave me a second look. That wall had clearly impressed her. It had formed instantly and held up against multiple bugbears hammering on it. Before we moved out, Bakov squatted down and started stripping weapons off the dead bugbears. Even mosquito meat is still meat. He bundled everything with leather cord and threw the heavy pack over his shoulder. I made a mental note. The Adventurer's Handbook had mentioned that monster weapons could be sold too. Some were dungeon originals. Others were looted from unlucky adventurers. Lomia tracked the fleeing bugbears through the dark tunnels, moving like a shadow. She practically merged with the darkness. If I hadn't been watching her closely, I'd have lost sight of her completely. Bakov clanked along behind us, weighed down by his loot pile, yelling at us to slow down. He pulled out the Adventurer's Handbook to check the map. Lomia rolled her eyes and said checking guides ruined the whole point of dungeon exploration. Real adventuring was about the thrill of the unknown. Bakov fired back that her reckless attitude would get her into serious trouble someday. Then Lomia turned to me with a sly smile and started teaching me more Eastern proverbs from her ancient book. Short-sighted and shallow. She claimed it meant that dwarven opinions are superficial and shouldn't be taken seriously. I glanced at Bakov, expecting an explosion, but he just shrugged and said he wouldn't stoop to arguing with tumbleweed. That earned me another death glare from Lomia. I asked if another apology would help. She stomped her foot and turned back to me, deliberately raising her voice so Bakov could hear. Here's another one. Abandon the short, choose the tall. It means a smart person should ditch dwarves and pick tall elves as companions. Bakov opened his mouth to retort, but Lomia suddenly went rigid. She pressed a finger to her lips. Silence. The playful atmosphere vanished instantly. She crouched, listening intently, her silver eyes sharp as blades in the dim glow. After a few breaths, she whispered, I can sense the 2 bugbears. Their nest is just ahead. Lomia scouted ahead like a ghost, melting into the darkness without a sound. She came back moments later with a full report. 2 bugbears, 1 hobgoblin spellcaster acting as the leader, and about 10 regular goblins. She'd also found and disabled a few tripwire traps at the entrance using her ranger spell, Find Traps. We quickly formed a plan. Lomia would sneak in and assassinate the hobgoblin leader first. Bakov would charge in to draw attention and smash through the main group. I'd play support and handle anything that slipped past them. The cave was pitch dark inside. I could barely see anything beyond arm's reach, but Lomia and Bakov moved like it was broad daylight. Right? Elves and dwarves both have racial dark vision. I'd forgotten about that. Lomia drew her bow slowly until it was at maximum tension. A combat technique. Full draw. A muffled grunt of pain echoed from deep inside, followed by furious howling. Direct hit on the leader. Bakov exploded into action. He hurled the entire bundle of looted weapons at a stunned bugbear, then smashed it with his hammer before it could recover. I realized with amazement that he'd been carrying that heavy weapon pack the entire time without dropping it. He spun through the cave like a human. Well, dwarf. Tornado, sweeping goblins aside with every rotation, breaking bones left and right. For goblins rushed me. I slammed my rebar staff into the ground. Tremor. The shockwave knocked them all off their feet. I leaped up and brought the rebar down on one. Jump slash, turning it into paste. Of the remaining 3, 2 tried to run. I caught one with a devastating backstrike that snapped its spine. The closest one lunged at me with a dagger, and I kicked it unconscious. The last runner got a magic stone to the back of the skull. Instant kill. It felt great. Real combat. No hesitation, clean kills. Bakov finished off both bugbears and the remaining goblins on his side. Lomia dealt with a few that tried to sneak attack, then calmly walked over to the dying hobgoblin leader and ended it with her short knife. Then Bakov remembered. Brooke wanted 2 alive. I pointed at the one I'd kicked unconscious. Lomia had knocked one out too. I tied them up with rope and hung them from my rebar staff like a carrying pole across my shoulders. Heavy, but manageable with my current strength. We collected proof of kills. Left ears, per Adventurers Association rules. Dungeon Goblin bounties were only about a fifth of posted bounty missions, but money is money. Then came the real treasure hunt, looting the nest. Unlike games where monsters drop loot automatically, we had to physically search every pocket on every corpse and scour the entire filthy cave. I used Mage Hand holding a torch to search methodically, though I was slower than Bakov with his dark vision and Lomia with her fine trap spell. The goblin nest was disgusting, garbage and filth everywhere. But Lomia found a cloth-wrapped box in a relatively clean corner. Inside, several dozen gold and silver coins of various designs, a pile of unpolished gemstones in different colors, and some jewelry, earrings and pendants set with gems. Most of the stones I couldn't identify, but I recognized a few pigeon egg-sized, perfectly cubic, pale yellow transparent crystals. Electric fluorite, the same stuff that powered Bakov's self-propelled cart. Lomia called me over to see something deeper in the cave. I moved my Mage Hand torch closer and went quiet. In a shallow, stinking pit lay several badly decomposed human remains, gnawed beyond recognition. Scattered beside them were a few porcelain identity tags. The lowest adventurer rank. These had been beginners, probably without even a proper class level. The mood turned heavy instantly. "This is why you exterminate goblins whenever you find them," Lomia said softly. Bakov silently collected the identity tags, wiped them clean with a cloth, and tucked them into his pouch. The association would notify the families. Lomia kicked a stone and snapped that porcelain rank adventurers had no business being on floor 2. Bakov guessed they'd gotten lost. I thought about the few silver coins I'd paid for my own registration and stopped feeling like it was overpriced. The association had a lot of work to do. We left the foul cave in somber silence. The cold, damp dungeon air outside actually felt refreshing by comparison. On the way back, I asked Lomia how she'd gotten surrounded by bugbears in the first place. She grudgingly explained she'd been chasing a rare glowing moth when she spotted a group of low-level adventurers being chased by bugbears. She shot 2 down to help, but those cowards ran the moment the bugbears turned toward her. Then 3 more bugbears appeared from a side tunnel. She insisted she could have handled it alone. The first 3 dungeon floors were easy for her. Bakov snorted and said her habit of meddling in other people's business hadn't changed in years. She told him to mind his own business. Then Bakov mentioned their old adventuring party, Shattered Rock Bow. It was him, Lomia, Brooke, and a halfling rogue named Quick Foot, Finn, about a dozen years ago. They'd worked together for nearly a year. I asked what happened and immediately felt awkward. Party breakups usually involve bad memories. But Lomia waved it off. Her family had called her home for a cousin's wedding, and then her father locked her in the forest for over a decade of special training. She'd only recently broken through to advanced rank and escaped. After she left, Brooke had gone back to the academy to keep studying, and the remaining 2 lost motivation and disbanded. No drama, just life. Bakov added that when Lomia returned to the area, she'd run into him by chance. He told her Brooke was teaching nearby, and there was a decent dungeon, so she tagged along. But instead of adventuring, Brooke had put them both to work in his cement factory for a week straight. We emerged from the dungeon as evening fell. Back at the factory, Brooke was waiting at the door. His eyes locked onto the 2 goblins dangling from my rebar staff, and his face lit up with excitement. "Perfect. Let's start experimenting immediately." "Brooke," Bakov roared, slamming his heavy weapon bundle onto the ground. "Look at the sky. What time is it? We've been working for you all day, crawled through a dungeon killing stinking goblins, and you won't even feed us." Lomia nodded emphatically. The first time she'd agreed with the dwarf all day. I silently gave them both a thumbs up. Brooke blinked, looked at the darkening sky, looked at our exhausted faces, and scratched his bald head sheepishly. Right. My treat. Wildfire Tavern. Let's go. We're drinking until we drop." At the Wildfire Tavern, our group turned heads the moment we walked in. Brooke's intimidating size, a stunning elf, and a dwarf together. That combination drew stares from everyone. Elves and dwarves don't usually get along, so people were genuinely confused. I was the only normal-looking human, which made me the least interesting one in the group. An experienced adventurer recognized Brooke as a high-level Earth Mage from Connaught City and quietly warned his table not to stare. Brooke got us a private room upstairs. Bakov immediately ordered 4 giant mugs of the coldest beer available. Lomia elegantly requested a white wine from Moonlight Forest. I stuck with lemon water. I despised drinking culture from my past life on construction sites and hadn't touched alcohol since coming to this world. Lomia started stirring up trouble almost immediately. She asked me if I knew why dwarves prefer beer over wine. I guessed it was because dwarven lands grow lots of wheat. Wrong, she said with a mischievous smile, leaning in just loud enough for Bakov to hear. It's because grape trellises are too tall for them to reach. Bakov choked on his beer so hard that foam shot out of his nose. He pointed at Lomia with a shaking finger, face beet red, and warned me to stay away from tumbleweed. Brooke laughed and noted that Lomia's verbal sparring skills had improved. Back in their adventuring days, Bakov always won their arguments. She proudly admitted she'd spent the past decade studying a compilation of dwarf jokes. Bakov demanded to know who'd written such a thing. She said his own ancestors had. There, books of grudges, read as comedy from the right angle. The bickering escalated until Bakov raised his fist and threatened to get serious. Lomia taunted him. Go ahead, jump up and punch my knee. Brooke finally intervened. He slammed the table and told them to act their age. Combined, they were nearly 200 years old, and they were embarrassing themselves in front of a younger person, meaning me. Lomia playfully pointed out she was technically still a minor, 2 years from official elven adulthood. I felt a pang of envy. Humans live barely a century, even in perfect health. Only transcendent level fighters above level 13 can extend their lifespan, and even then rarely past 300. Regular elves casually live over 1,000 years without any class levels at all. Bakov called her out for claiming to be Lomia's elder in the dungeon, but now playing the youth card. She sipped her wine and said there was no contradiction. She could absolutely be an elder to a certain short person while still being underage. Then Brooke got serious. He told them that when they argued about lifespan, they should think about how humans feel. In a few decades, he'd be in the ground while they'd look basically the same as now. The room went quiet. Lomia glanced at Brooke's face, noticeably more weathered than when they'd adventured together. Then at me, young and mortal. She lowered her head and apologized softly. Bakov stroked his beard and agreed to drop it. We raised our glasses, beer, wine, and lemon water, and the mood slowly recovered. Cheers. Last night's dinner conversation stuck with me. Watching Brooke's weathered face next to the ageless elf and the long-lived dwarf hit something deep. In a world with magic, living less than 100 years felt like a waste. I needed to reach level 13 to break through human lifespan limits, and I was only level 3, not even properly specialized yet. My immediate priority was upgrading my combat technique to complete my class advancement. I woke up early, but Brooke and Bakov had already left for the cement factory an hour before. Even after drinking heavily the night before, Brooke's research obsession had him up at dawn. The man's dedication was borderline insane. After breakfast, I headed to the factory. When I pushed open the heavy door, I froze at what I saw. Brooke was pressing his hands against a wet concrete wall, channeling earth magic. Beside him, Bakov was holding one of the captured goblins, tied up like a sausage with a short wooden stick jammed in its mouth. The goblin's eyes were rolled back, its body convulsing wildly, because Bakov was shocking it with his lightning claw cantrip. The electric current made the goblin's body spasm so violently that the stick in its mouth was plunging in and out of the wet concrete at a rapid, consistent frequency, essentially acting as a vibrator. Air bubbles were being forced out of the wall's surface and popping. They'd turned goblins into living concrete vibrating tools through electrocution. "What are you two doing?" I shouted. Brooke was beaming with excitement. He said my vibration idea was working perfectly. The wall's internal structure was much denser, magic conducted better through it, and air pockets were drastically reduced. I looked at the two goblins foaming at the mouth, eyes rolled back, twitching uncontrollably, and rushed forward. "Stop. This is too inhumane. I couldn't watch this." I pulled out my short dagger and quickly put both goblins out of their misery. Brooke protested. He said they could have lasted longer, maybe even been reused after a rest period. Efficiency maximization, he called it. "This is not the solution," I said firmly. I glanced at Bakov. The dwarf literally owned an electric vehicle powered by crystal batteries. He had access to electrical technology, yet his approach to using it was barbarically crude, like sharpening a circuit board into an arrowhead. Bakov scratched his beard, confused. So what do you suggest? Dead things don't move on their own. Tools, I said without hesitation. Electric-powered mechanical tools. I took a deep breath and started sketching in my mind, recalling a piece of equipment from every construction site in my previous life. A concrete vibrator. We need a specialized tool called a vibrating rod, I said, crouching down and sketching on the dusty floor with a stick. The design was straightforward. A hollow iron tube, not too thick, about arm's length. Inside goes a solid iron rod, but the key is the shape. The middle section needs to be shaved off center, creating an eccentric weight. Connect one end to a small electric motor powered by an electric fluorite crystal. When the eccentric rod spins at high speed inside the tube, the off-center mass makes the whole thing vibrate intensely and evenly. Seal both ends, plunge it into wet concrete, and it would work several times better than any goblin, stable, controllable, and a single charged crystal could keep it running for half a day. I asked Bakov if he could source a small rotary motor. He got defensive about his cart, but said a friend in town could make one easily. As I explained the mechanics, Brooke and Bakov's faces went from confused to amazed to stunned. Brooke was so captivated he forgot to maintain his earth wall spell. The half-finished concrete wall collapsed into a pile of mud. He didn't even notice. He just stared at my sketch and called me a genius. Bakov stroked his beard repeatedly. Eccentric rotation creates vibration. How did I never think of that? Brooke, your student's brain isn't full of spell diagrams. It's full of gold. I played it down with my usual cover story. A traveling artificer had showed me a similar gadget when I was a kid playing near my village. I just had good memory. Your village sure gets a lot of visiting professionals, Bakov muttered suspiciously. But being a pure pragmatist, he dropped it instantly and grabbed my arm. Let's go? I know a dwarf blacksmith in town. We're building this thing right now. On the way, we passed the Adventurers Association, and I remembered the dead adventurers' identity tags. Bakov said he'd already delivered them at dawn. He also handed me my share of yesterday's bounty. 6 gold and 16 silver for the bugbear and goblins I'd killed, calculated at dungeon rates. We reached a blacksmith shop on the west side of town. The smith was another dwarf named McGregor, a level 3 artificer with skilled hands, and a workshop full of both standard weapons and odd mechanical devices. Bakov shoved me forward and told me to explain. I described the design in detail, the eccentric rod, the hollow tube, the power transmission, the electric fluorite driver. McGregor's eyes lit up with professional excitement. Brilliant concept. Simple and direct. I can do this. Materials are all on hand. He moved fast. Rolled iron sheets into a tube, cut it to length. Selected a precision iron rod, and expertly milled an off-center groove in the middle. Using brass gears and tiny bearings, he assembled a compact transmission box to connect the motor to the eccentric rod. Bakov contributed a pigeon egg-sized electric fluorite crystal and charged it with his lightning guidance cantrip while McGregor worked. The smith mounted the crystal in a custom base with a neat brass toggle switch, connected it to the transmission box, inserted the eccentric rod into the tube, and locked everything together. Done. McGregor held up the finished, vibrating rod triumphantly.